Americans and small businesses more options when it comes to health coverage. Over half of Americans receive health coverage through employment-based insurance plans. While large employers have the resources to readily provide benefits, small businesses all too often cannot afford to do so. This burdens both employers and employees at mom and pop and Main Street businesses. Unaffordable health costs, limited options, and administrative burdens create barriers. This disadvantage makes it even harder to attract and retain a talented workforce. H.R. 3799 will address this dynamic. By allowing small businesses to band together and offer pooled health insurance coverage to employees, it will deliver more choice and flexibility. It also takes steps to reduce costs for small businesses that choose to self-insure, and will codify choice arrangement plans to allow employees to provide tax-advantaged funds to employees to purchase portable health insurance plans. H.R. 3799 will go a long way toward reducing insurance costs for employers, ensuring that workers continue to have access to high-quality, affordable health care coverage through their workplace. The second measure I'll discuss is H.R. 3564, the Middle Class Borrower Protection Act of 2023. The Biden administration has been outspoken in its desire to re-engineer every aspect of America to fit a progressive agenda. A massive expansion of spending and the size of government has only been a starting point of that design. We've also seen them force their agenda through executive mandates. Many of these regulations have impacted wide swaths of our economy and daily lives. They even include policies aimed at hampering the one-of-a-kind ladder of opportunity and upward mobility that fueled the promise of the American dream for generations. It's for that very reason the Rules Committee is here today considering H.R. 3564. Home ownership is a goal for many. People work hard, save, and live within their means in pursuit of purchasing a home. Yet the Biden administration wants to punish those who've prioritized financial responsibility. That's right, the Biden administration supports a new rule that would raise mortgage fees on borrowers with higher credit scores, while borrowers with lower scores pay less. So if you've worked diligently and managed your credit, you'll now pay more to subsidize those with riskier loans. It's deliberately unfair. It's also a significant new tax on 1 out of every 2 borrowers. H.R. 3564 will block these unjust mortgage fee charges from ever being implemented. Finally, our third measure is House Resolution 461. Last month, New York City shocked many Americans when it announced its plan to house migrants in public school facilities. You heard me correctly. New York tried to take public school facilities away from school children in order to use them to house migrants. While New York City backed down on this deeply misguided plan, other major cities have considered doing the same thing. It's indisputable that the United States presently faces a crisis at our southern border. This is a national security and humanitarian crisis, and unfortunately, it's largely of the Biden administration's own making. But the many failures of their radical agenda do not excuse local governments like that of New York City deciding to prioritize migrants over school children. House Resolution 461 expresses congressional condemnation of New York City's proposed plan and makes clear that this should not happen anywhere in America. It also articulates that the ultimate fault for this crisis rests with President Biden, who has systematically failed to secure the southern border and who has made it drastically harder for the federal government to address illegal immigration. I now yield to our ranking member and my very good friend, Mr. McGovern, for any remarks he wishes to make.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And before I begin, I want to acknowledge the presence of some guests: Anastasia Glover, Jalen Batista, Emily Dickey, and Kevin Trout, all part of the SUNY system in New York. And the reason why I'm acknowledging them, even though I'm from Massachusetts, is that our staff director on the minority side, Don Sisson, is a graduate of the SUNY system. And so we want to welcome them all here today. And it's good to see you, Mr. Chairman. We are here to consider 3 measures, none of which help the American people, all of which are about advancing House Republicans' extreme agenda. Res 461 is inflammatory, uninformed policy that would condemn using school gyms as temporary places of shelter for migrants. Frankly, this non-binding resolution doesn't solve any legitimate problem. Instead, it demonizes migrants, including asylum seekers who are here legally. Let's dig into that a little bit more. The way this bill is written, it could include asylum seekers, people who have fled their country because they have an individualized fear of persecution. Many of them have been traumatized in ways that none of us here can even imagine, and yet Republicans don't seem to care. They want to use them to make a point. And I can't believe I have to say this, but these are people, not political pawns. They are coming to our country seeking a better life. They are human beings and deserve to be treated with dignity and respect. And yet, Republican governors have treated them like they are garbage, busing them across the country with no advance notice or coordination to score political points. And I find that disgusting. If these were victims of a natural disaster, a fire, flooding, a building collapse, we wouldn't hesitate to provide temporary shelter in school gyms and other available public facilities. So really, this legislation comes down to the fact that Republicans would rather demonize people than do something to help them. And Republicans are selling this resolution as an important measure to, quote, protect students. Seriously? Let's talk about protecting students. Our kids are dying from gun violence. We have lost nearly 1,000 kids so far this year to guns. Parents are terrified that their kids will be next. Teachers are terrified their class will be next. Students are terrified that they or their friends will be next. And Republicans want to regulate gyms. It's not gyms that are killing our kids, it's guns. If Republicans were serious about helping students, they would do everything in their power to end the gun violence epidemic in this country. They would work to address learning loss. They would provide adequate school funding. Class sizes could shrink and teachers could get paid what they deserve. These are issues that parents, teachers, and students are begging Congress to fix. And unfortunately, it doesn't seem to matter. Republicans are saying no to increasing school funding, no to keeping our communities safe, and no to improving our education system. But they are throwing their full support behind passing this resolution that does nothing to help set students up for success and only furthers culture wars by disparaging and attacking migrants. It's disgraceful. Then we have Republicans' H.R. 3564, which would increase mortgage fees charged to middle-income borrowers, but decrease fees charged to wealthy borrowers. You heard that right. They want to make it harder for middle-class Americans to purchase a home. And then we have H.R. 3799, is House Republicans' latest bid to chip away at the Affordable Care Act, undermining the health care of millions while playing into the hands of big pharma and billionaire health insurance companies. The ACA is popular for a reason. It expanded Medicaid for low-income Americans, protected access to coverage for people with pre-existing conditions, required private health insurance to cover preventive care without any cost sharing, and created state-based exchanges where individuals can purchase quality, affordable coverage. This bill would circumvent the ACA's protections on pre-existing conditions, lifetime and annual limits, and preventative care, potentially jeopardizing millions of Americans' health coverage. Both bills make one thing clear. Republicans have no shame in ensuring big corporations and those with means get even further ahead while making it more difficult for regular people. Meanwhile, President Biden and Democrats are working to expand the middle class, to build a strong economy from the bottom up and the middle out. Inflation is slowing, and unemployment rates are at historic lows because of the policies that Democrats have enacted last Congress. Republicans want more tax cuts for the ultra wealthy and well-connected, while they slash essential programs and funding that helps everyday people. So Democrats want to protect vulnerable Americans and make the economy work for everyone, and it's as simple as that. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back my time and look forward to hearing from our witnesses.
Thank you very much. Before I turn to our witnesses, the chair wants to exercise a personal prerogative and recognize my friend, Mark Tapscott, who's in the back. Mark and I were teenage Republicans together in our high school in Moore, Oklahoma, longer ago than either of us care to admit. I'll acknowledge I was older than him. Not much, 1 year. But my friend later went on, had a distinguished career, was communications director at the Republican National Committee, has been with a variety of conservative publications since then, including most recently and still with Epoch Times, which if you're a conservative, you know quite well, and the mastermind is back there behind you. So, Mark, it is really good to see you, a delight to have you here. Thank you, my friend. Without objection, any prepared statements that our witnesses may have will be included in the record. I'd like to welcome our first panel, Chairman Jason Smith from the Committee on Ways and Means, and Chairwoman Virginia Fox, and Ranking Member Bobby Scott of the Committee on Education and Workforce. Chairman Smith, welcome back to the Rules Committee, and I welcome your testimony.
Thank you, Chairman Cole, Ranking Member McGovern, for having me here today. It's always a pleasure to be before the Rules Committee. As we learned this week with the latest Consumer Price Index report, working families that have spent the last 2 years being hammered by inflation, they continue to suffer under higher prices. At the start of Joe Biden's presidency, the Congressional Budget Office projected the economy would recover to pre-pandemic levels without any more stimulus. Then Democrats proceeded to ram through trillions in new spending that led to the highest inflation in 40 years, making everything from food to gas to healthcare less affordable. What the president's cost of living crisis has taught us is that too often Washington gets in the way of Americans being able to provide for their families. And when Washington needs to be involved, it should be a partner with the American people, not a barrier. The Ways and Means Committee has traveled over 5,000 miles from Atlanta to the plains of Oklahoma, where we've heard from workers and small businesses about their difficulty in today's economy. The very first healthcare hearing our committee had was specifically focused on identifying the drivers of high healthcare costs and to hear from small business owners and policy experts what Congress can do to expand choice, increase flexibility, and reduce burdens. I'm here to discuss policies that recently passed out of the Ways and Means Committee that will do just that. Health reimbursement arrangements, HRAs, allow employers to provide tax advantage funds for their workers to cover qualified medical expenses. In 2019, President Trump expanded HRAs to let workers use those funds to purchase their own health insurance plan on the individual market. Representative Kevin Hern's bill, the Choice Arrangement Act, would make this flexible option permanent under the law for small businesses and workers. We've heard that 87% of small businesses say they want another way to provide health insurance for their employees without offering a traditional group plan. And 90% of individuals want to be able to take their health insurance with them if they change jobs. The Choice Arrangement Act allows for just that. Through this bill, mom and pop shops on Main Street have the option to avoid managing a complex health insurance plan and instead spend their time focusing on their workers and customers. And for workers, it means that they have more flexibility and options when it comes to choosing the right health plan that works for them and their families. And as important, they can take their plan with them if they change jobs. Also contained in the Choice Arrangement Act is a solution authored by Representative Claudia Tenney. During our hearings, we learned that only 30% of small businesses with less than 50 employees offer health insurance. That's down from 50% only 20 years ago. Importantly, 70% of small businesses do not know that the federal government already allows for flexible health coverage opportunities that could be beneficial to them and their employees. This includes choice arrangements and qualified small employer health reimbursement arrangements and the small business health care tax credit. Representative Tenney's proposal requires the Treasury Department to notify small businesses of these different tax advantage coverage options available to them. Giving employers more information about the health benefit options available to them will not only reduce the burden on small businesses who are scrambling to keep the lights on, but will also give workers access to personalized health options that meet their needs. Thank you for allowing me to testify today, and I look forward to questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chair now recognizes Chairwoman Virginia Fox for any comments she cares to make.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks, Mr. McGovern, and all the members of the Rules Committee for inviting us here today. For decades, small businesses have expressed concerns about the burdensome cost of health care. This issue hits millions of American small business owners. That's why I'm pleased to see committee Republicans stepping up and spearheading solutions that bring down health care costs for job creators across the country, including 2 bills from the Education and Workforce Committee that are included in H.R. 3799. The first bill, the Self-Insurance Protection Act, ensures that small businesses have just as much opportunity to choose self-insurance as large businesses. Greater access to self-insurance is mutually beneficial for small businesses and employees. For employers, stop-loss insurance protects them from excessive risk and allows them to adopt self-funded health plans. Meanwhile, employees get to enjoy affordable and comprehensive coverage. Unfortunately, some states, like New York and Delaware, have banned the use of stop-loss for small business. What's worse, rising costs are forcing many small employers to drop coverage, leaving workers uninsured or forcing them to the Obamacare exchanges, where out-of-pocket costs are 3 times higher than employer-sponsored plans. Let me repeat that. In Obamacare exchanges, out-of-pocket costs are 3 times higher than employer-sponsored plans. The Self-Insurance Protection Act protects small businesses' access to stop-loss insurance and gives them a chance to fight the tides and continue to offer affordable coverage to their employees. The second bill, the Association Health Plans Act, also works to support employers and working Americans by allowing small businesses and self-employed individuals to join an association health plan, AHP. Allowing small businesses to pool their resources together would result in lower premiums and, in some cases, cut health costs by 50%. By giving individuals an alternative to the Obamacare marketplace, AHPs tackle a broader problem by lowering the cost of the United States' overall health care spending. The Obamacare exchanges are now more expensive than ever, and AHPs offer small businesses, self-employed individuals, and gig workers better, more affordable options. Since Obamacare went into effect, I've received many letters complaining about the cost and other negative aspects of the program. In contrast, among the hundreds of letters I've received on this issue, I do not remember ever getting a negative letter from an employee of a business which offers insurance. According to research from the NFIB, the cost of health insurance has remained a top concern for small businesses for over 3 decades. I'm confident that both bills I've outlined today will address this concern and bring needed relief to millions of employers and workers. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much.
Should we talk about the other one? Would you like me to talk about HJRES 461 also now, or since
let's
we're dealing
hold
with
that.
healthcare?
Yeah, there'll be a second panel. We want
That's
to
what I
move
thought.
through this quickly so Chairman Smith can move on. And,
That's what I thought.
Thank you very much. So with that, let me turn to my very good friend, the ranking member of the Education Workforce Committee, Mr. Scott from Virginia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. McGovern, other members of the committee. I'm here to speak on the education and workforce provisions of H.R. 3799 and speak in opposition to the bill. This bill is yet another recycled, futile attempt to sabotage the Affordable Care Act and make it harder for workers and families to find affordable and high-quality health insurance. This legislative package includes 2 bills that were marked up in Education and Workforce Committee. First, the Association Health Plans Act, which undermines affordable care for working families. Association plans might lower premiums for some enrollees, but they do so by skimping on benefits and increasing costs for everybody else. And that's simple arithmetic. When you allow a low-cost group to come out of the pool, then everybody else in the pool will be paying more. These plans leave behind those who are more expensive to cover, like those with pre-existing conditions and older, sicker Americans, and break the core promise of the Affordable Care Act that everyone has access to affordable health care. Specifically, association health plans allow employers to cherry-pick low-risk young individuals for a separate pool than the ACA marketplace. This forces those left behind, on average, to pay more for coverage. Adding insult to injury, if somebody in an association gets sick and starts running up bills, they can leave the plan and return to the ACA marketplace and pay the average that everybody else is paying. And so it's simply unfair for everybody else who's paying higher prices due to the association plans, essentially serving as backup insurance for anybody that gets sick. Expanding association health plans does nothing to address the underlying driver of health care costs. In other words, the bill won't do anything to lower costs for workers and families. Instead, what it does, it favors the privileged few who can get into a plan with lower costs as opposed to those who are left behind. The second bill in the package is a self-insurance protection plan, a bill that also undermines the ACA by preventing critical consumer protections from being applied to stop-loss insurance. Now, when subject to appropriate guardrails and regulations, stop-loss can mitigate the risk for self-insured group health plans. But regrettably, stop-loss insurance is increasingly designed to mimic health care, but they're not obligated to follow any of the rules, regulations, or consumer protections that a health care plan would have. This bill would make it virtually impossible for the federal government or state governments to protect consumers from abusive practices. Most disturbingly, it takes an unprecedented step of invalidating state laws that are designed to protect consumers and also prohibit states from enacting similar laws in the future. Now, the full impact of that preemption is unclear, but it may call into question a state's ability to even apply basic solvency standards to stop-loss insurance. These proposals included in H.R. 3799 are dangerous for healthcare consumers, and by undermining the ACA, H.R. 3799 restricts access to essential protections that every individual deserves and ultimately will increase the cost for everybody that can't get into one of these plans. I therefore strongly urge opposition to this bill. Yield back.
Thank you for your testimony. Chair has no questions for the panel at this point, but I'll recognize personal prerogative once again, advise the committee that our esteemed colleague, Mr. Norman, is celebrating his 40th birthday yet again, and ought to be recognized. So, with that, I'll turn to my good friend, distinguished Vice Chair of the Committee, Mr. Burgess, Dr. Burgess, for any questions he may have.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm actually pretty excited about what we're doing today. Association health plans, health reimbursement arrangements. These are some of the missing pieces of our healthcare system. Our late colleague, Sam Johnson, had the Association health plans legislation for years. And quite honestly, as I was a doctor in private practice for a number of years, it was hard trying to find group coverage for my small group because I was in the small group market. And the small group market could be difficult to navigate. But how much better would it have been had I been able to be part of a group such as my county medical society, American College of OB-GYNs, had I been able to take the membership of that group and purchase insurance in the group market, the large group market, like, I don't know, any of your large communications companies that are known by their initials primarily. It would have allowed certainly a lowering of premiums. I disagree with the ranking member from Virginia. I do not think it was a method of, well, if anything, it was cost shifting away from those expensive plans that we were required to buy in the small group market. And I can think of any number of groups, certainly realtors who tend to work in an office where there's only 1 to 2 people. If they can put themselves together with all the realtors in a given area, say the North Texas area, or the state of North Carolina, then they could get the advantage of buying in the large group market that our large multi-state corporations enjoy. I think the ability to buy insurance in that market would be a meaningful improvement, not just for the business owner, but also for the employee who would subsequently be covered. So realtors, physicians' offices, chambers of commerce with 1 or 2 employees full-time, if they could band together and buy in the large group market, it would make a significant difference. I guess what I don't understand, Chairwoman Fox, is why it has taken so long to get here. And it took basically an executive order in the previous administration to actually begin this journey.
Well, I wish I knew the answer to your question about why it's taken so long. You're certainly right. I remember very fondly Sam Johnson. And we passed Association Healthcare Plan. This is what I've been told. I don't know if the story is true, but we passed it out of the 109th Congress, my first Congress here. And my understanding is that it went to the Senate and that it passed on a partisan basis out of the committee in the Senate, but that the Republican leader was reluctant to put it on the floor because it passed on only a partisan basis in the Senate. That's what I was told, and therefore it never came up for a vote in the Senate. Now, I've been on the off and on the Education Committee since that time, and I don't know how many times we've passed it out of the committee, many times. But it certainly is a bill that deserves to pass. All those folks out there who own small businesses ought to have this option. And it simply is not true that this insurance selects out people who are high-risk people. It does not do that. They have no ability to do that. They have to take everybody who would be in the pool. So as you described, all realtors, no matter what your health condition would be, if you're part of the program, you're in it. So it's very frustrating because I do think the public's been misled on what these plans do. So I guess the other side has a better messaging machine than we do.
Well, let me ask you this. What about the tax treatment of the premiums that are paid in the association health plan? Are those similar to the large group market?
As far as I know, but I don't know if
Oh, yeah, we
the
should ask
Chairman
the
of Ways and
we
Means.
should ask the tax man who's here. Let me rephrase that question to Chairman Smith.
If the tax structure in these is similar to, what was the question, Mr.?
The large group.
It's similar to the large group market.
Yes.
Well, and if indeed that is the case, I mean, that one of the biggest gripes I had as a small business owner was I got to pay for this insurance with after-tax dollars, whereas the big corporations that are in the large group market get the employer exclusion that is allows their dollars to go further because they're pre-tax dollars. And that is one of the great inequities of the system that I hope is corrected in this. On the issue of health reimbursement arrangements, Chairman Smith, again, this is one of the programs that I've thought is it's tailor-made for some situations. Now, let me see if I understand this correctly. When the Affordable Care Act was visited upon the Congress and every member of Congress was made to take insurance in the Affordable Care Act, and then there was concern on the part of Harry Reid and President Obama and Speaker Boehner that there would be a brain drain in Congress and everyone would leave because the insurance was so crummy, but they'll make a special deal for members of Congress, and here is a tax-free subsidy that you can walk into the exchange as long as you buy your insurance, the DC Gold plan. So members of Congress basically have had a health reimbursement arrangement for over 10 years' time. So it seems like it's high time to make that same type of flexibility available to people in small businesses, where they would have a pre-tax subsidy available to walk into an exchange. And I think my friend Mr. Roy has mention of the health sharing ministries, which would also be a bonus. So is my understanding of that correct, that is similar to what members of Congress already enjoy?
Yes.
So why wouldn't we do that? Why the resistance? When you had this markup in committee, why the resistance to this if it's what's already being enjoyed by most members of Congress?
Yeah, it's hard to explain. One of the points that people tried to make in markup, and also the ranking member made up in his opening statement, is that this would deny protections of pre-existing conditions. And that's completely false. Under the choice arrangement plans, they must be ACA compliant. That's a requirement, meaning that these plans must cover pre-existing conditions. They must cap out-of-pocket expenses and guarantee issue during our enrollment, among other key health benefits. They have to be ACA compliant, so that has been their main argument in opposition, which isn't even accurate.
So I had wondered about that, so I thank you for clarifying that. And Chairwoman Fox, if I could ask you, in the large group market, pre-existing conditions are covered. I mean, that was part of the agreement between Newt Gingrich and Bill Clinton back in 1996 with the passage of the Kennedy-Kassebaum Act. It way preceded the Affordable Care Act, but this goes back way into the mists of time. Pre-existing conditions have been covered in the large group market because of this, again, this agreement that was made between the Speaker of the House and the President of the United States at the time.
That's my understanding, and that would be true of these two.
Well, again, I thank you for bringing them to our attention today. Thank you for bringing them to the floor. I can't wait to vote in favor of the rule, and that we'll bring these up and vote in favor of the underlying legislation, because I just think it is so critically important to our constituents that they have this type of flexibility and this type of protection. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll yield back.
Thank you, and the chair now turns to the distinguished ranking member for any questions he may have.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and let me also wish Mr. Norman a happy birthday. And my gift to you will be, I'll be fairly brief in my questioning. Dr. Burgess said it gives him a tremendous sense of excitement to bring these bills up. He and I obviously have a different definition of what excitement is, because this is not it, in my opinion. And I do want to say that the concern we have is that AHPs could vary premiums based on age or gender. It would not have to provide essential health benefits, which is very problematic to us. I was here when we debated the ACA, and basically it was over making sure people did have essential health benefits, including making sure people with pre-existing conditions were protected. But I just have one question to Chairman Smith. You know, it just seems I've heard my Republican friends talk a lot about cutting the deficit, or not adding to the deficit. But my understanding from CBO is that this bill would increase the deficit by over $300 million. And it is especially striking to me that the bill increases the deficit while, in my opinion, weakening people's health care protections. Have you seen the CBO score?
I believe that would probably be Representative Fox's question, because I think the score comes from Ed and Labor Committee.
Sorry.
Have you seen the CBO score?
I have not. I
Yeah,
apologize.
no, I will like to ask unanimous consent to insert in the record the CBO score, which basically says that this bill would increase the deficit by over $300 million. And I just find it
300
particularly.
what?
What?
300 what?
Million.
But there is a manager's amendment ranking member that corrects
right,
that.
No, it doesn't. It does, according to this is CBO, this is, it says, let me read it to you here. Estimated direct spending and revenue effects of the Rules Committee print and the Choice Arrangement Act as amended by Amendment 8, which I assume is the manager's amendment.
It was 579.
Yeah, it was 579 million. With your change, it's 300 million. I pointed out because the deal that was struck only a few weeks ago, which punishes poor people, the whole fuss was over the deficit, and here we have, a bill that, even with the fixes, adds $300 million to the deficit. I guess, I just find that somewhat startling.
There's numerous pay fors that I'd be happy to pay that $300 million with.
but
So
they're not-
I don't believe it should be. And I believe my
They're not
manager's
included in
amendment
this bill.
paid.
No, the manager's amendment does not, according to CBO, does not, it reduces it from what, 524? 579 million to 300 million. I guess 300 million is better than 579 million, but it's still $300
There's
million.
a lot of tax credits in the Inflation Reduction Act we could use to pay for that.
Yeah. Well, the bottom line is, in this bill, yeah, we have a disagreement with you on that, but nonetheless, they're not included in this bill. And the regulation that this, and going back in response to Mr. Burgess, the regulation that this bill purports to codify discusses purchasing insurance that meets the ACA protections like essential benefits and lifetime limits or caps. This bill does not codify that element of the regulation. So a less consumer-friendly administration could undo those pieces in the future, and it is not correct to say that this bill codifies the ACA protections for these arrangements. Mr. Scott.
Yeah, a lot has been said about whether or not it protects people with pre-existing conditions. Technically, Dr. Burgess, it does. But you can price by past experience. If you got a lot of people with pre-existing conditions, the price is going to be higher than average. People are going to look at it and say, no, I'm going to stay in the ACA regular pool. That's why when you have an ACA plan, it'll always be cheaper, because if you randomly distribute the groups, some will be higher, some will be lower. Those that are going to charge higher than average will not be viable plans. Nobody will buy the product, only those with lower plans. And so you've gotten healthy people coming out. Now, there are a couple of things. So you technically have to, but the fact that you can screen, you can price by experience, means that those with pre-existing conditions never get into one of these things. The other is, if you got a bunch of realtors, all from the locality, and one of them has a child that's in the children's hospital, all their peers are going to say, come on, Mike, get back in the pool and don't hurt us. And so that's how the or if somebody with a pre-existing lot of expenses will be by peer pressure, jump back in the regular pool, so that the realtors or the physicians or the Chamber of Commerce plan will be much cheaper. So technically, yeah, you got to cover everybody with pre-existing conditions, but in practice, either you'll get priced out or you'll peer pressure, you won't join. But so that what you're going to have is a cheaper plan. You're going to have only healthier people, and what's left behind is going to be more expensive. And the more these things proliferate, unless you can get into one of these, the prices will go higher and higher. And we've been there because that's how it was before the ACA. If you had pre-existing condition, you couldn't buy insurance. Now you can, at the average rate.
And as I said, the way this bill is written, it could mean that a less consumer-friendly administration in the future could undo the pieces of the ACA that we think is so essential. But in any event, Mr. Chairman, I don't know if I ask unanimous consent to put the CBO estimate into the record.
Without objection.
And I just want to do that because I know my friends who are deficit hawks would want to have it in the record because that's what they claim is so incredibly important. But I want to put in the record, and out of respect for Mr. Norman's birthday, I will ask no further questions. You're back.
Thank my friend. We now turn to the gentleman from Pennsylvania for any questions he may have.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it. And I know Mr. Norman's getting a lot of attention today, but it was Mr. Smith's birthday on Friday, so I want to acknowledge his birthday. And you're welcome. And thank all the witnesses for coming in. And with that, I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Gentlelady from Pennsylvania is recognized for any questions she may have.
Thank you. And if we're celebrating holidays, yesterday was Juneteenth, and we had a number of very vibrant celebrations in my district, which were really wonderful educational and cultural opportunities for our entire country. I am concerned about the Choice Act and its codification of a Trump-era rule that really allows employers to offer a capped amount of money towards healthcare costs to certain classes of employees. It appears to be yet another attempt to circumvent the ACA's protections on pre-existing conditions, lifetime and annual limits, and preventative care. Does this fit the pattern, Mr. Scott, of a death by 1,000 cuts to the ACA without any replacement plan?
It does, and the basic promise of the ACA is that everybody can get affordable coverage because everybody's paying average. If you've got a pre-existing condition, you pay average. If you don't have a pre-existing condition, you pay average. And once you allow people that are young and healthy to pull out, those left behind, just simple arithmetic, will end up paying more. The more healthy people you pull out, the more expensive it gets for everybody else. And we know what that looks like because that was what it was before the Affordable Care Act. If you had a pre-existing condition, if you could get insurance, you paid a lot. It's almost unaffordable. And that's what we would be getting. And like I said, if you have an association plan, it'll always be cheaper because if the analysis is that it's going to be higher than average, nobody's going to buy it.
And I share the ranking member's concern that it provides less robust, less complete healthcare coverage and does so at a cost to the federal government, with the CBO score, even as amended, being almost $300 million. So not a big fan of this one. Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you. Gentlelady from Minnesota is recognized for any questions she may have.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I just kind of want to bring it back to, and maybe Chairman Smith could just answer a couple of questions. You know, isn't it good to help people afford the kind of health care insurance they want or need or fits their needs? Isn't that a good thing?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The patient should have more options and more choices instead of the government telling them what they have to have.
Yeah, and that's what we're doing here. We are trying to make sure that people do have affordable health insurance, and you do that in a variety of ways so that people can find what fits their needs and their lifestyle and their financial ability. And I just wanted you to repeat, you mentioned in your opening the statistics about how many of the small businesses and how many people have health insurance, and I just wanted you to repeat that because I think that's an important thing that we're dealing with.
Yeah, if you look at right now, in small businesses, currently only 30% provide health insurance. 20 years ago, 50% provided employee health insurance. So we're definitely trending in the wrong direction, and giving more options and opportunities is extremely important. We've been doing these field hearings all over the country, and one that jumps to mind, which you were actually in attendance in Petersburg, West Virginia, was a restaurant owner named Ashley Bachman, and she pointed out that how difficult it is to just hire employees And a big consideration is being able to provide healthcare and options to healthcare. And this is another aspect that creates an options for employers, can hopefully attract more employees to help lift more people out of poverty and have healthcare coverage while they're doing that.
And Chairman Smith, as I recall, it was options and affordability were the big things that we heard about. So that's why small businesses aren't, because it is so just outrageously expensive when they don't have the flexibility to look for something that fits, their financial ability and their patients, and their employees. I won't ask a lot of questions because I think that we understand the need for this flexibility. But I just want to say that, as we hear about, Chairman Scott had mentioned something to the effect of that. If you're in an association and you have high bills, there's going to be peer pressure to get out. I don't necessarily think that's accurate because I don't even know if people would find out who has the bills and things like that. I've heard of association groups and nobody, when someone has high bills, they are not pressured to get out of a people, I think, see the reason that they're there is that is an actuarial issue and they pay for it and those kinds of things happen. But I don't see peer pressure because I think there's all kinds of laws that would prevent them from pointing to somebody and saying they're costing more money. And so I think that's a little far-fetched, and I think the association...
If it's a small...
Ma'am, or excuse me, sir, do you want me to yield? Would you want to ask me to yield? Or are you
Will the
just
young
gonna
lady
interrupt?
yield?
Yes, for a moment.
Okay, yeah, if it's a small group, everybody knows whose child is in the children's hospital, running up thousands of dollars a day, and then when the bill comes for the premium renewal, everybody gets shocked.
But sir, I've never heard of someone going to people and saying you have to get out of our plan. And I don't know if Chairman Fox, you seemed like you wanted to say something, but I've just never heard of that.
If the gentlewoman would yield, it seems to me that the whole idea, particularly behind association health plans, is you're making the group as large as you could possibly make it.
Yes.
So that is not going to happen. And I think what we hear from the ranking member and what we hear from Democrats all the time is this may happen, this may happen, this may happen. Boogeymen are thrown up all the time to say why we shouldn't do something. And I agree with you. I just don't think that's going to be a problem.
And I think I've seen great success with some of the association, the ability of those associations to come together because it does help the small businesses and that. But I guess I will just wrap up by saying this. I think that it is a positive thing to provide more flexibility, more options, because we do want people covered by health insurance. And if this way will help people afford it, help them have the kind of health insurance that they'd like, then we need to be doing that and providing people with more options, not less. And with that, I yield back. Oh, I don't yet, Mr. Chair. I yield to Dr. Burgess.
So I just want to point out on the CBO report that's gotten so much attention, it does address that issue of the increased coverage numbers. And that is important. And they actually estimate that 40,000 people a year who are currently uninsured will now have insurance because of the efforts you're undertaking. So for that, I thank you as well, and I'll yield back to the gentlelady.
And I yield back, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. Gentlelady from New Mexico is recognized for any questions she may have for the panel.
Thank you very much, Chairman. It just strikes me as, I'm flying in and looking at the materials and thinking what the last many years have been like, that basically Americans want to be able to have affordable, accessible health care. And they want to make sure that health bills to pay for the health care they need doesn't bankrupt them. And that what the Affordable Care Act did and what we did last year in the American Rescue Plan and the Inflation Reduction Act was making sure that health care was more affordable so that we could make sure we grew the middle class. And they did not have to worry about bills for health care that would bankrupt them. And we were able to do that because we had guardrails, because we had protections to make sure that when you got pregnant, when you had a very serious illness, when you had cancer, that you were not then bankrupted for the care that you got. And that, as the ranking member pointed out, that the pool was large enough to make sure that the risks were spread out. And, you know, it worked. In 2022, the uninsured rate stood at 8%, the lowest level in history. Finally, 92% of Americans now have access to health insurance and health care. In fact, following the American Rescue Plan, 16.3 million people signed up for coverage through healthcare.gov. What we did was save $800 per year in premiums. So what Americans want is for us to keep moving in that direction, and what we see instead coming out of these Republican bills is an attempt to go backwards, to make it harder for families to afford health care. Ranking Member Scott, we've heard that association health plans won't be able to set premiums based on health, but could they use age and gender as a basis?
Well, they would get priced by, you could be priced by experience. So if the association is running up higher bills, they'd have to pay higher premiums.
So if they were older, if you had a workforce that is older, if you had a workforce that had more women in it, would you likely be paying a higher price?
And sicker, yes, you'd be paying a higher price. And this doesn't reduce overall healthcare costs. You've just shifted the cost into an association. The association will always have below average costs because the consumer will look, I can join the association, oh, wait a minute, their costs are higher than the Affordable Care Act premiums. I'm not moving. So you won't buy the higher premium association. So some associations will have a high price, some a low price. The high price won't be viable. So yeah, every association will have a lower than average price. And it's simple arithmetic. Everybody left behind will be paying on average more. And so the more associations you get coming out paying lower prices, the higher everybody else. And if you got a pre-existing condition or you're in a group with people with pre-existing conditions, you'll never be able to get an association. So you're just stuck with a gradually increasing premium. All the healthy people over here are getting lower premiums, and you know what that looks like because it looked like that before the Affordable Care Act. People with pre-existing conditions couldn't afford insurance.
So, Chairwoman Fox, the new association health plans would, under the AHPA that's presented here, would not be required to cover maternity or prenatal care. Is that correct?
Say again, I'm sorry.
They would not be required to cover maternity or prenatal care.
No essential benefits.
No essential benefits.
That
was a question for the chair, but thank you for answering it. And ranking member, was there an amendment and add in workforce to make sure that maternity and prenatal care would be covered? Ranking member Scott?
Say again.
I recall there was actually an amendment because people are worried, women are worried that we want to make sure prenatal care is covered. I mean, I gave birth to 3 babies and I had many other pregnancies. It's dangerous.
And if maternal coverage is not provided in the association, then disproportionately those costs are borne by those left behind.
So what strikes me
Mr.
on
Scott,
this bill...
could I ask you a question? Would you yield a second? What
Yes.
do you mean by those left behind?
Those
Who are those people? Because you've referred to those people. If they're not in association health plans, they're people left behind. Who are they?
They're the people who are buying insurance on the marketplace.
Okay, well, that doesn't make sense to me. By what you're saying is, if they're not in association,
Right.
can get lower prices in the association
That's right.
health.
That's right. You're right.
Okay, but if they're eligible to join the association because they're in a certain category, why would they be left behind? That's what I don't understand.
The people who join the association will enjoy lower health care costs. Everybody else that they just left will be on average paying more. The healthcare costs didn't go down. This is simple arithmetic. If you have a group of people with insurance.
Then of course they could go into the ACA, of course, right?
That's where
If it's a better deal for them, then they could go in the ACA. So nobody has to be left behind in our culture.
I shall.
No. We don't have association plans now. If you have everybody in the Affordable Care Act, if only healthy people can join the associations, because sick people will get priced out and they won't join.
Mr. Scott, that is simply not true. And I think we have to say it over and over.
Okay, this is arithmetic.
So the Affordable Care Act was carefully crafted to make sure that everybody would be included, that there would be guardrails that would cover things like maternity care, things like addiction and behavioral health, especially now that we're facing all of that. And what we see with AHPs, it is not covering those. It is not required. And so instead of addressing some of the major healthcare issues, we are not addressing them in the AHP because we're leaving those out. Then we are like discriminating in essence within the health insurance
And
plans.
maternity care is very expensive.
Right.
And if you can have a plan that doesn't cover maternity care, you can save money. But we have, under the Affordable Care Act, everybody pays average. You lump everybody's costs together and everybody pays average. Now, if you want to pick and choose, the maternity care is very expensive, and if I can get a plan without maternity, I can save some money. But everybody else who is left behind will be paying more.
So basically,
It's arithmetic.
Right, it's simply arithmetic, but the focus on women right here, right? Because we are seeing across the country and even in this Congress that Republicans want to ban women from getting reproductive health care, but they won't require that all insurance plans, including AHPs, cover maternity care. That's the disconnect here, and that's what I think we are seeing is this is simply wrong. With that, Mr. Chairman, with the outrage about this disconnect and mistreatment of women, even though it is more expensive to treat us, we should be treated for all of the care we need. With that, Mr. Chair, I yield back.
Thank you very much. Gentleman from Kentucky is recognized for any questions he may have.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to yield time to Chairwoman Fox if she had some additional comments.
I do, Mr. Chairman, and I thank the gentleman from Kentucky. Number one, AHPs would be treated exactly as employer-sponsored plans. So if they choose to do maternity and newborn care, they can do that. And again, our colleagues are saying, if, may, as though things would be that way. But it's going to be up to the AHPs, but they operate in exactly the same way as employer-sponsored healthcare does. The other comment I want to make, and it just absolutely drives me insane, when somebody says that a benefit to the citizens is a cost to the federal government. Less money coming into the federal government is considered by our friends on the other side of the aisle as a cost to the federal government, as though everything we earn belongs to the federal government. So the $300 million that you're talking about, as Mr. Burgess rightfully pointed out, means more people are going to be covered, which means less money going to the federal government to pay the subsidies for Obamacare. But meanwhile, people get choices. And so it's all to the benefit of the citizen. It's less control by the federal government, less money going to the federal government, and that's good. So I think it's important that we point that out. And let me say, under essential health benefits, which we talked about a lot when Obamacare was covered, and we've talked about a lot in other things. You may have a business that is all single men, and they want to have health insurance. But they're being forced in many cases to do maternity and newborn care and pediatric care, but they don't need that. And so again, under choices that you're giving people, you're saying you don't have to pay for all of these benefits which the government deems are essential. That's probably all that I need to say before I get in trouble saying something else.
Well, I'll give you as much time as it takes to get in trouble. Chairman Smith, would you have any comments that haven't been addressed?
I think Chairwoman Fox did a great job.
I would just say that there are people who are hard workers and they have no employers. There are hundreds of thousands of farmers,
Right.
and they are excluded from these wonderful employee plans that for people who have bosses. Now, a lot of people farm because they don't want a boss, but and they're providing a service for society, but these association plans would allow them, I believe, to have the same benefit or access to benefits that people who work for corporations have. And this was a problem before Obamacare. It's a problem after Obamacare. I would just say that one of the biggest untold failures of Obamacare has been COVID. You didn't have much choice in COVID for the kind of treatment you were going to get. The government told the hospitals what they could do and what they couldn't do, and that's what you got. And I think that was a failure. But I'll yield to my good colleague.
Thank you so much.
Legend
Kentuckians are always so kind.
Yes.
So
Don't abuse us for that.
So I think that there was a really important sentence that the chairwoman pointed out, which is if they choose to offer maternity care. And that is, I think, what our problem with it is we don't want employers, we don't want AHPs to say, we're going to choose not to offer maternity care. That was the idea of offering some basic sets of key pieces of healthcare that we need in this country. And so I think that I appreciated your answer, Chairwoman, because I think that highlighted the distinction. Thank you very much for allowing me to
Would you
yield.
indulge me for a question? Would you support this if they were required to offer?
I think one of the ways in which we could improve this, and we offered an amendment and ed, House Ed and Workforce, and every single Republican voted against the amendment to require that maternity care be offered. So it would have, it would be a different bill, but the Republicans in House Education and Workforce chose to reject that amendment.
Maybe we can fix that when this gets to the Senate.
I stand corrected. The Association Health Plans do cover maternity and child care.
I thought they might. That's why I was asking if she would support the bill where they were required to. One of the reasons. Do they or don't? Do they or don't they? They may. Okay, not shall. Okay, thank you very much. And
I think that's the issue of may versus you are required
Understood.
to. It's the optional choice.
I'll yield back.
Thank you. Gentleman from Texas is recognized for whatever questions he has for the panel.
No, one more clarification. They are required to cover childbirth and newborn. So we'll get rid of that myth.
Wait a minute, say it again. The association plans?
Let me just read it.
So on my time,
Gentlemen,
I will yield to the
Sorry.
chair lady to fill in this gap.
Association health plans provide both maternity and newborn benefits. For large group association health plans, Title VII of the Civil Rights Act requires the plans to cover pregnancy, childbirth, and related conditions in the same manner as they cover other medical conditions under the association health plans.
Would you mind providing us the section in the law that provides that?
Well, we had an amendment.
Gentleman from Texas controls the time.
I thank the chairman. I was trying to provide some flexibility to kind of bring that matter to a conclusion. The question I would ask, though, Chairman Fox or Chairman Smith, is okay, if that is true, or whether there is a requirement that there is that coverage or not, does that increase the cost for the businesses in question? Would the increased coverage requirements, whatever they may be, likely increase the cost of the health insurance coverage for a business, whether it's a large corporation, you know, those grand corporatists in Orlando at Walt Disney, or anybody else? If they're providing insurance, if they provide greater coverages, whether it's required by law or whether it's by choice, does it cost more?
Generally, I would say yes.
Right. So therein lies the whole question that we're talking about. And thus it has always been, is who pays? That has always been the fundamental question, is who pays? And then what are we doing to overall prices, the overall price of care and the quality of care when we make choices about how that care is administered? That's it. That's the whole thing. And we go around like championing one thing or the other in some big, speech for politics about we will cover maternity care, we will cover this, we will cover that, and pre-existing conditions. And all you're doing is blowing the lid off of costs. That's what you're doing. By definition, as has borne out, that's what you're doing. And in the process, by the way, enriching large corporations massively. And of course, their investors, whomever they may be. There are a couple of data points out there. I wonder if either of the two chairmen or the ranking member would like to comment. According to the Bureau of Labor and Statistics, medical and health service managers, which are described as managers that, quote, plan, direct, and coordinate the business activities of healthcare providers, otherwise known as bureaucrats, are slated to see a 32% growth in jobs from 2019 to 2029. This is compared to a 4% growth for physicians and surgeons. Health insurance companies take in about $1 trillion per year. Health insurance companies. Health and medical insurance companies place second in biggest industries by revenue in the United States, only behind retirement and pension plans, by the way. The deals they strike with the government, most notably and most recently, the massive deal struck under Obamacare, guarantees that success and growth rate. For example, Anthem had a 344% increase in government revenue from 2010 to 2020. United Healthcare had a 198% increase in government revenue. Cigna, Anthem, United Healthcare, and Humana have seen an average increase of 562% in their stock price from January 11 to January 21. Additionally, in 2016, 60% of the nation's top 5 health insurers' revenue, $213 billion, came from Medicare and Medicaid, up from $92 billion in 2010. In 2018, for at least 3 of these companies, the majority of their revenue, I want to state that again, the majority of their revenue comes from the government. United Health, 53%, Anthem, 58%, and Humana, a whopping 86.9% of the revenue comes from the government. Small businesses cannot break into the big insurance market because they are small. And my Democrat colleagues want them to be left with no options whatsoever. So we slide closer for Medicare for all. That is precisely what my Democratic colleagues want. Precisely what they actually campaign upon. And in my experience, when somebody tells you something, you should believe them. That's the truth. The exceptions that Republicans are putting forward at the moment, modest, with all due respect to my colleagues, these are crumbs. These are crumbs from the table. Important ones, I support them. But it's like taking Dixie cups of water and throwing it onto a massive fire and pretending that you're leaving something behind that's going to save the house. But you're not. Because all we're doing is continuing to fuel the corporate crony insurance-run healthcare that's not really care. It's corporate crony insurance-run health management that is destroying the ability of individual doctors to provide care, the ability of individual people to get care, and driving up the costs. And here we have the complaint that this would cost, according to scoring, in this world in which we operate in DC, where scoring is how we decide policy. And the complaint is it would cost $300 million. I don't know if that's a 10-year budget window or 5-year. I don't know. Somebody can fill me in on what it is on the window for the $300 million net. And I remember I heard the Chairman Smith, say, well, we could pay for that. Well, of course we could pay for that. We literally have $22 billion just sitting over the Department of Commerce after the debt deal, just sitting there, ready to be used for whatever you want to go spend some of this magic money on. So you can pay for this if you want to. The question isn't that. The question isn't whether or not you're going to say, wait a second, we're going to pull people out or allow them the option to get out of this and say, I want to go provide this other solution, this business. I want to go provide this other solution. So healthy people, allegedly, could be a large number of people, but want to go into that solution. And that allegedly pulls certain people out of the pool and drives the cost up. Well, that kind of gives up the game, doesn't it? I mean, that's the whole point. My friend from Virginia is talking about, well, we're averaging the cost. Those are the terms we use in the swamp, right? We're averaging the cost. Well, what does that really mean? That really means we're saying you American, you have to pay X for whatever we allow you to have, we the government, through our wisdom, this is what you're allowed to have. And as a result of that, you'll be a part of this pool, whether you like it or not, so that we can, quote, spread those costs out so that we can provide, quote unquote, coverage. That's what that whole convoluted scheme is. But in fact, when I came to Washington, I was put on Obamacare. I was put on Obamacare because, we don't have those gold-plated plans that everybody always says we have out on the Twitterverse, right? What we have is Obamacare, which is far from gold-plated health care, let me assure you. Because coverage isn't actually care. The fact is, at least the last time I checked, these things can change. The last time I checked, if I were on the Obamacare plan that I would have through my job as a member of the United States Congress, I wouldn't be able to go to MD Anderson, which was the cancer center in Texas that I went to in order to combat cancer in 2011. Now, in what universe is that care? It's not. We go around patting ourselves on the back because we throw people into coverages and we expand Medicaid massively to the tune of the 22 million people that we allegedly expanded coverage to. 11 million of those were put on Medicaid. Hardly something people run around saying, well, that's a better solution because you ignore the 6 million that got taken off of their private insurance plans after Obamacare was put into place. Now, we can go around this barn 100 times and everybody goes around talking about, pre-existing conditions and, they like to thump their chest about what all is, the greatness of Obamacare. But the fact is we have a massively broken system that is enriching a small cadre of folks and corporations to run insurance-run health management rather than care. I would throw to both of the chairs of the two committees here, do you agree with that sentiment? And is not the whole point of these bills to provide greater options, to provide more affordable options for small businesses, to be able to allow more Americans to be able to access options in the healthcare system rather than being pigeonholed into very tight, fewer options from a government-run system or government-controlled options?
It absolutely, Mr. Roy, provides more options. On point that you hit on earlier, the expanded Obamacare subsidies that was passed by Democrats just recently, that money flowed directly to those large health insurers, what you were talking about.
Right.
What's different is the choice arrangements that we have here allow small businesses to reimburse their employees directly. So those employees can go purchase what option of health insurance we want. So we're doing the complete opposite. We're not allowing those big health insurers to have all the money directly from government. We're giving it to the individual so they can pick the plan that best fits their healthcare needs.
Ms. Fox?
Yeah, and I think to summarize what Mr. Smith just said and what you were saying is it all boils down again to whether the government's going to be in control or you're going to have the individual in control. And that the Democrats always go to government control. Let me give you a couple of additional facts. For employer-sponsored plans have lower average deductibles $1,763 for an individual ESI plan compared to $5,155 for an individual ACA plan. In addition, they have lower average out-of-pocket cost, $4,355 average maximum for an individual ESI plan compared with $8,519 average maximum for an individual marketplace. So what you're saying, Mr. Roy, everybody's paying for these government plans and what the chairman was saying about the average cost. You're right. It's cost sharing, okay, but for all of us who are not on those plans, we're helping to pay. It shows employer-sponsored plans are a much better bargain than the ACA in every way that you cut it, every way that you cover it. And by creating more choices, you're going to lower those costs even further because you're going to be able to open this up to the farmers Mr. Massey's talking about, the small business owners. So you're going to get people off of Obamacare, hopefully, onto these, and it would be a lot better for them.
Well,
and the comments you made about all this money going into the large insurers, it's just an abomination. It's just an abomination.
Well, thank you, Chairwoman Fox, and I will be mindful of time. And a couple points. A 2019 study found that only 31% of Americans were able to correctly answer this question. Suppose that under your health insurance policy, hospital expenses are subject to a $1,000 deductible and a $250 per day copay. You get sick and are hospitalized for 4 days, and the bill comes to $6,000. How much of that hospital bill will you have to pay yourself? Most people don't know, and they don't understand the complexities of the system that we've structured. Now, that is an indictment of the entire system. It's not an indictment of Obamacare. It's not an indictment of any of the alphabet soups per se, right? It is an indictment of a complex system that we've allowed to get more complex. The point I will simply make, I offered 3 amendments. One is a resolution that I believe will be made in order. I think there are 2 others that are still being debated about whether they'll be made in order because of the same question that is we're debating about the underlying bill about cost, right? And whether there'll be a waiver or whether or not there's an amendment that I might be making in order because we're able to pay for it. But I had 2 amendments. One would allow healthcare sharing ministries to be reimbursed through an HRA. Healthcare sharing ministries are being used by hundreds of thousands, millions perhaps of Americans as a way to be able to provide affordable care that gives them options to be able to access the doctor and the care of their choosing. And we ought to be making it easier for them, not harder. And that is one of the points that we're trying to address here. So I'd offer an amendment that would have been able to do that. The second amendment would allow direct medical care to be reimbursed through an HRA, the ability to go directly to a direct primary care provider. There are thousands of those that have sprung up around the country as alternatives to the insurance and hospital-run health quote care. It's not really health care, let's be clear, that we currently have that's breaking the back of everybody. In July of 2022, last year, Amazon purchased the direct primary care company, One Medical, for almost $4 billion. Now, that is in part because that alternative was providing an option for people, but it is an option that is severely constrained by the massive limitations put on it by Obamacare and the ACA, and that we're trying to free up. Now, the 2 amendments that I've offered probably would score. Yes, because of the same reason we're talking about it, the underlying bill would score. But the very score basically gives up the game. It explains why this whole system is convoluted. So I would suggest that these amendments should be made in order, that if these things cost, be happy to go figure out how to find a way to make them pass budget muster and the points of order. Because like right now, we have hundreds of billions of dollars, probably trillions actually, that are floating out there on the back of massive policies that my colleagues on the other side of the aisle put forward, whether it was the transportation bill, whether it was an IIJA, whether it was the Inflation Reduction Act, which Goldman Sachs says it costs $1.2 trillion, or even, as I said, the modest $22 billion sitting in an account at the Department of Commerce now that is basically funny money for Washington to go play with. Well, why don't we go play with that funny money to free this up for the American people to be able to use it for healthcare. I yield back.
Gentleman from South Carolina is recognized for any questions he may have.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me just say that I run a small business. Healthcare is one of our major costs. I say small, 20 people. Having options is what the American system is all about. One size does not fit all. Y'all mentioned my birthday. I don't need maternity care anymore. We don't need the coverage. I ought to be able to pick what I need. And that, along with the fact, and Texas has done a good job of this, tort reform is needed now more than ever. I can't tell you, and Dr. Burgess, you know this, the doctors that practice medicine who are defensive medicine, they're spending our dollars, their time, trying to avoid a lawsuit. And God help you if you're an OBGYN and come out with a bad outcome, or really any other physician that has a bad outcome with a patient, which is going to happen. So I do like these amendments. I think it's the first step. It makes sense, and we'll support it. Thank each one of you for being with us today. I yield back.
Thank you. Gentlelady from Indiana is recognized for any questions she may have.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Apologies, I've lost my voice. Thank you to the witnesses for testifying before us today. I appreciate your time. So our Democrat colleagues like to categorize the association health plans as junk insurance. They say these plans allow cherry picking and discriminate against people with pre-existing conditions. In reality, association health plans are anything but junk plans. They are a great option for all Americans regardless of health status. As a former small business owner, I certainly would have appreciated the opportunity to have the choice that association health plans can offer. And Dr. Fox, as you stated just a moment ago, employer-sponsored insurance on average provides richer and more robust coverage than plans on the Obamacare marketplace, and the majority of Americans are satisfied with their employer-sponsored plans. The Association Health Plans Act, which is part of the Choice Arrangement Act, would allow more small employers and self-employed individuals to band together to create an association health plan. Chairwoman Fox, does this bill allow for association health plans to cherry pick which employees can participate?
Thank you very much for that question. Absolutely not. We need to say it over and over and over again. Association Health Plans Act explicitly prohibits AHPs from discriminating based on an individual's health status and does not allow them to raise premiums, rescind coverage, or create waiting periods for people with pre-existing conditions. And by the way, I need to say something about pre-existing conditions aside from your question. It was mentioned earlier that we didn't have coverage for pre-existing conditions in this country before, but I remember the debate on Obamacare. My recollection is we had 27 states that had pools for pre-existing conditions, and North Carolina was one of those states, and the average cost for premiums for the people in pre-existing condition pool was lower than for other plans. So if there were states that didn't have pools for pre-existing conditions, then they should have done it. The poor excuse for Obamacare was that it was going to cover all pre-existing conditions as though none were covered before was just not true. And let me come back now to the AHPs. They cannot charge individual employees different premiums based on their health status. They're treated just like large employers. The premium is based on the risk profile of the AHP, just like large employers. And then the premiums can vary based on the risk profile of the individual company. So it is not true that the association health plans discriminate on the basis of one's health status. We can't say that often enough.
And Chairwoman Fox, does this bill discriminate against poorer or low-income employees?
No.
The self-insured market allows employers to have more control over plan benefit design and lower out-of-pocket costs for their employees. It's certainly a concept that I support. I continue to be dismayed by our colleagues on the other side of the aisle and the viewpoint that seems to consistently come out that government always knows best. Dr. Fox, you aptly stated it always seems to come back to government control versus individual control or freedom of choice. I believe adding choice to the market is a good thing. I certainly prefer competition in the marketplace over bureaucratic government monopolies. Thank you for this legislation. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you very much. I assume there's no further questions on H.R. 3799. Given that, Mr. Smith, Chairman Smith, you are excused. I'd like to welcome our second panel. It bears a lot of similarities to our first panel. So I'd like to welcome Chair Virginia Fox and Ranking Member Bobby Scott from the Committee on Education and Workforce. Dr. Scott, I welcome your testimony.
I think she meant Dr. Fox.
Well, you technically are a doctor as a lawyer, so, but actually, in this case, Dr. Fox is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm sure Congressman Scott's gotten a doctorate degree from somebody.
A law degree.
Of the law, he got his law degree, so
That's
that
a
would
JD.
count. That's right, JD, there you go. HRES 461 is a resolution that expresses a sense of Congress that K-12 public school facilities should not be used to house migrants. That this bill is before the Rules Committee says two things about the priorities of this new House majority. First, we'll fight against open border policies. Second, we'll fight against policies that endanger our nation's children. The border is wide open. In April of 2020, under the Trump presidency, there were 17,106 migrant encounters with enforcement officers at our southwest border. In April 2023, under the Biden presidency, there were 211,401 migrant encounters with enforcement officers at our southwest border. The astronomical increase can be explained only by Biden's relaxing, revoking, and reversing of the strong border policies of the last administration. Biden's policies effectively send a message to cartels. Our border is open for you to traffic migrants, terrorists, and fentanyl. That leads me to the second policy priority, children. Open border policies are dangerous. It's bad enough that the leading cause of death for adults under 45 is now fentanyl overdose because of a wide open southern border. We shouldn't let Democrats also endanger young children by forcing them to share gymnasiums with unidentified migrants. In New York City, Mayor Eric Adams planned to house migrants in up to 20 current and former public school gymnasiums. In New York State, Governor Kathy Hochul is similarly enthusiastic about housing migrants at education facilities. And we know that public schools did, in fact, carry out these plans. CNN, CBS, and the New York Post have all uncovered instances of New York public schools already harboring migrants. For every migrant housed in school facilities using taxpayer dollars, precious resources, time, and attention are diverted from our nation's school children. This bill sends a clear message to blue state governors and blue state mayors. It's an injustice, it's dangerous, and we won't stand for it. With that, I urge the passage of HRES 461, and I yield back.
Thank you very much. Ranking Member Scott, you're recognized for your testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ranking Member McGovern, members of the committee, I rise in opposition of HRES 461. It's frustrating that we're taking up another proposal that, among other things, purports to improve school safety, but does nothing to address gun violence in schools or improve students' mental health. In fact, so far this Congress, House Republican priorities for K through 12 education have focused almost entirely on culture wars. We have passed legislation to ban books. The House advanced legislation seeking to bar trans students from participating in sports. Now the Education and Workforce Committee has reported a proposal that condemns the use of school facilities to temporarily house immigrants. I didn't know that our committee had jurisdiction over immigration policy, but I guess here goes. Resolution further takes the extreme stance of suggesting that schools that house immigrants should be ineligible to receive federal funds. This resolution also falsely implies that temporarily using school facilities to house immigrants leads to learning loss. There's been no evidence to support that claim. Addressing learning loss and helping students make up for lost time in the classroom required us to make historic investments in schools' abilities to offer after-school, summer, and mentorship programs like we did 2 years ago in the American Rescue Plan Act. But we can't continue to meaningfully address learning loss and meet students' mental health needs if we're talking about taking all federal funds away from schools that do not adhere to the Republicans' agenda. And as far as school safety goes, we can't protect school safety without addressing gun violence. This resolution does not mention the reality that gun violence poses the greatest threat to our children's safety. This year alone, we've seen more than 20 school shootings across the country, and according to the Kaiser Foundation, guns are the leading cause of death among children and teens. Any conversation about school safety, therefore, that does not meaningfully address gun violence is not a serious conversation. If we want to talk about learning loss, we should be talking about evidence-based strategies that meet the needs of our students. If my colleagues want to keep students safe, we should be confronting what is actually killing them. Parents, teachers, and students are demanding that we take meaningful action on gun violence, yet we have not budged. My colleagues on the other side of the aisle have not budged on that issue. Reality is that HRS 461 does not address the real issues confronting our students today, and that is gun violence and helping to address learning loss, and therefore I strongly urge my colleagues to oppose the resolution.
Thank you for testimony. The chair has no questions at this time. Dr. Burgess, you're recognized for any questions you may care to address the panel.
Well, thank you. President Biden, when he was running for office, suggested that there's no reason why the United States could not take in an additional 2 million people a year in our system. Well, I think we've proved the point that, well, he doubled the number. And guess what? We got a real problem. We got a real problem with a lot of our smaller school districts, I know, in Texas. The numbers of English as second language kids, the number of kids who are admitted behind grade level, it's overwhelming, these small school districts. So while I welcome this legislation today, I think it's timely, it's necessary. I will just tell you, I have been frustrated by Secretary Becerra, by Secretary Mayorkas, when you ask them, when they come into committee to give the hearings on the budget, on what they're projecting, and you ask them, what are you doing to prepare small communities, small school districts for what is headed their way? That the president said he wanted to bring their way. He said he wanted 2 million, he got 4. How in the world are you preparing these communities and these school districts for what is headed their way? Doesn't have much to do with the bill we've got in front of us today. I think the bill's a good idea. We should prohibit this activity, but the larger issue is, what are we doing to our smaller school districts and overwhelming them with a problem that should be controlled by the federal government at the border? And I'll be happy to hear from either of you on that.
Well, I will make just one quick observation. When I was first elected to Congress, I met with the superintendent of our largest county and largest school district in my district, and he told me that for several years, the only growth that they were having in the number of children coming into the schools was with children who had English as a second language. And so almost all the growth occurring, all the cost were coming from migrant children. And that's just gotten worse and worse and worse over the years. And it's particularly gotten really bad under the Biden administration. We all know that President Biden campaigned on an open border. And as you say, he's been, in one case, more successful than he wanted to be by doubling the number of people who've come in illegally. It's wrong. A border is important to have for any country. none of us could go to another country anywhere without permission from that country to come in. It just won't happen. And so we're not operating the way a country should be operating, which is with a border. You know, my father's parents came here in the early 1900s. They came through Ellis Island. They came through legally. My mother's ancestors have been here since the 1700s. So, you know, I'm a granddaughter of migrants on my father's side, and so I'm a believer in migration. We admit over 1 million people each year legally. I've talked to many of those people. They pay a lot of money. They spend a lot of time. Sometimes it takes 15, 20 years for them to go through the process. That's the way it ought to be. We're the greatest country in the world. People want to come here. I understand that. I understand they're human beings, Mr. McGovern, and I understand why they would want to come here. But to maintain this as the greatest country in the world, we have to follow the rules. If we let our rules go, if we become an anarchy like some of these other countries, then we won't be the place people want to come or the place people want to grow up in. So thank you very much for letting me preach that little sermon. Thank you.
I'd just say that if you want to talk immigration policy, you need to talk to people in Homeland Security and Judiciary Committee. I know that schools have, talking about the bill before us, schools are traditionally used in emergencies, hurricanes and whatnot without any fanfare. Taking money away from the school districts, as this bill does, cannot be helpful.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll yield back.
Distinguished ranking members recognized for any questions he may have.
Well, thank you. This has been an interesting conversation that's gone on, Dr. Fox and Dr. Burgess, but I'm trying to think about what it has to do with the bill before us. General immigration policy, what you feel about more migration, I mean, that's one thing, but that's not what this bill is dealing with. This is dealing with a specific issue about housing migrants in gymnasiums in schools. And so the conversation my friends just had was interesting, but it doesn't seem to relate to the bill that we're dealing with. I'm trying to understand what this bill does. Dr. Fox, does this bill have the force of law?
Mr. McGovern, you know what an HJ-Res does.
I do, but I just want to make sure you did.
It's a sense of Congress.
Right. Yeah, so it's our opinion, but it does. I mean, I think you mentioned we need to shut this practice down. This bill doesn't do that. It's the opinion of those who vote for it. Am I correct?
That's right.
All right.
It lets people know where we stand
Right.
on an issue.
And I'm just trying to understand how many gymnasiums in New York City or New York State are currently housing migrants right now?
My understanding is it was 20 or so.
Well,
I don't know in other places how many.
No, the other reason why I'm a little bit confused is I'm reading from your report that the majority prepared. And it says here, it talks about in New York City, while a community outcry ultimately put a stop to New York City's plans. I'm trying to understand, does that mean it stopped, or is it still ongoing, or?
I think they announced they wanted to do it, and then there was an outcry in the community.
So right now, at least in New York City, because this is focused on New York City, I'm just trying to understand, is it your view that at this moment that no schools in New York City are doing this?
I don't know for certain that that's the case.
I know, but we're bringing a sensitive Congress resolution to the floor decrying a practice that we want to end that may.
But we don't want it to happen in the future.
Well, but this doesn't do anything to prevent anything from happening in the future. I mean, this just basically, as you admitted, is a sense of Congress resolution, which is nothing more than our opinion.
But
who cares?
But that doesn't mean that we could not do something after that. We could
do anything. I just want to establish that this bill does nothing. I just want to make sure that I'm clear on this. That this bill does nothing. Mr. Scott, do you have any? I mean, does this bill do something that I don't understand here?
It's resolution expressing an opinion without the force of law.
And normally, we would bring them up under suspensions.
Most resolutions brought up on suspensions aren't even marked up
Yeah.
in committee.
Yeah, there must be some like secret committee within the Republican conference that sits around and tries to come up with creative, ways to drive wedges in our country or to, create issues where, quite frankly, they're not really issues. But I mean, the idea that we are in the Rules Committee bringing up a sense of Congress resolution, which is our opinion, for those who vote for it, that doesn't have the force of law, that doesn't provide any assistance for alternative housing, if in fact this practice is being used, that doesn't provide any assistance. There's an issue about learning loss, doesn't provide any additional assistance to schools where that may be an issue. I don't know, Dr. Fox, am I missing something? Do you want to add anything? You're more than welcome.
No,
to.
sir.
Oh, okay. I thought you wanted to be recognized. Yeah, I think this is just another attempt to demonize immigrants, which my friends have become so gifted at. And it is so destructive and so unfair and such a waste of our time here. I'm trying to also, as I pointed out in my opening statement, Ranking Member Scott has also pointed out, we do have a problem when it comes to school safety with regard to guns. And silence on the other side. I shouldn't say silence. Last week we moved forward on a bill that would make it easier to kill people for people who want to do harm to students and to others in this country. This is kind of a big nothing burger, with the exception of the fact that it adds to this anti-immigrant climate, which is so destructive. It's not about a solution. It's about beating up on people. In many cases, people fleeing violence that none of us can possibly imagine. Does anyone have an opinion on governors who, without coordinating with other states, drop off migrants in those particular states? Do you think that that's something that governors should do, Dr. Fox?
Well, that isn't the subject before us, and I haven't really given any thought to that.
Yeah, well,
I think one governor is being sued for dropping them off in Massachusetts.
yeah.
Will the gentleman yield for a moment?
I'm happy to yield.
Well, look, my ask of Secretary Becerra and Secretary Mayorkas was, could we please let these small communities and small school districts know what is headed their way? And they wouldn't do it. They wouldn't answer the question. They wouldn't even dignify it with a response. So how can you be critical of my governor who's sending migrants to other cities and you say he's not notifying them? Hells Bells, Texas is not being notified.
Well,
But
I'm referring to, it wasn't your governor, but I think it was the governor of Florida, who dropped off some, without any announcement, migrants in Martha's Vineyard, Massachusetts. Now, our governor would have been happy to work with the governor of Florida to accommodate those migrants, because actually, we don't spend all our time beating up on migrants, and we understand that the situations that many of them are fleeing are quite desperate. But again, this is just part of a string of cruelty that my friends on the Republican side have manufactured. And look, immigration is a serious issue. Dealing with the migrants who are coming into this country is a serious issue, and we need to deal with it. This is not. And this is creating the impression, an impression that, quite frankly, is not a reality. So anyway, well, it's good to see everybody, and we'll bring this up on the floor tomorrow. But I appreciate Dr. Fox reminding all of us that this bill does absolutely nothing, has no force of law, does absolutely nothing. And with that, I yield back my time.
I did not say that. I said the bill allows people to voice their opinions on the subject.
Yeah, well, I guess voicing opinions is a lot different than a bill that has the force of law that actually does something.
Well, there's a hell of a lot of voicing of opinions in this committee every day.
Well, I regret the fact that our side doesn't take up the lion's share of the voicing of opinions. But the bottom line is, this bill does nothing. I yield back.
Gentlelady from Minnesota is recognized for any questions she may have.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I have to mention, the ranking member, I was under the impression that we weren't to question people's motives, weren't to question our colleagues' motives. And
When did I question it?
well, Mr. Chair and ranking member, you said, you implied or said that there was a secret committee of the Republicans to just solely to think of ways to drive wedges. You also said that we were trying to demonize immigrants, and I
didn't single anybody out.
I'm sorry?
I didn't single any single, I didn't single.
No,
any
no,
single
but
person out.
the implication is, and I'm not saying it directly, but I'm just concerned that we are getting to that edge where we are questioning each other's motives. So I apologize if I've offended you, but I felt like I should say something because I was concerned as you went through that. But I appreciate, but I did want to just say a couple of things. Dr. Burgess mentioned the issues of the educational setbacks, and that is a concern if they're moving children or somehow displacing them. Well, there's housing immigrants, but I did want to say that this is something that is a sense of Congress, and I appreciate the opportunity to be able to express my disapproval of this. When I think about the safety of the schools, I'm not allowed in my grandchildren's schools. I can't just stop in and say hello. I have to have, my daughter or my son have to put me on a list. I have to provide ID, the whole thing, just to have lunch with a grandchild or to visit with them. And I think that this really does get at the issue of safety concerns, because you have adults who are in the building and staying there. If the children are present, that's a real huge safety concern. So I think I appreciate the opportunity to express my disapproval of this practice. So thank you, and with that, I yield back.
Gentlelady from Pennsylvania is recognized for any questions she may have.
Thank you. There are so many problems with this resolution, it's really hard to know where to start. Maybe with the fact that it was introduced and moved through the wrong committee. The resolution seeks to condemn something that hasn't happened and could never happen based on the plain language of the first line of the resolution, whereas sheltering aliens who are not admitted to the United States. You can't shelter someone who hasn't been admitted to the United States. I mean, that's just to start. It's nothing more than fear-mongering based on untruth after untruth or alternative fact, if that's how you prefer to call it. The ranking member's comments touched on the facts or lack of facts underlying this resolution. It references recent news reports about New York City considering the use of public school gyms to house asylum seekers, not aliens from Mars or anywhere else, who have been shipped to New York and other cities with Democratic administrations by grandstanding Republican governors using these migrants as political pawns. So this resolution contends first that 300 aliens were housed in New York City public schools on 2 days in May. The most basic Google search shows that the 300 migrant asylum seekers, they've filed for asylum, so they're legal, were housed in an abandoned school after 15 busloads of migrant seekers were dumped in New York by the Republican governors. And all the nonsense being espoused about safety of children, there's no there. No kids were adjacent to migrants being housed in public schools that were in use. Underlying all this nonsense, as usual, is either a fundamental lack of understanding about how our asylum system actually works or outright misrepresentations, and I leave it to whomever to figure out which it is. When migrant people arrive at our border and claim asylum, they have to meet certain basic requirements to file that legal claim. If they meet those requirements, they file their claim, they're given a hearing date and an opportunity to work through the legal process. If they can't meet those basic requirements, they're kicked out. They're immediately deported. So anyone who's allowed to file an asylum claim and then is placed on a bus to New York or any other destination has already been entered into the system and met that initial legal test. So the resolution's based on fiction. Even worse, it seeks to pull money from our already cash-strapped public schools by stirring up fear of an alien invasion that's going to threaten school children. It's fear-mongering MAGA nonsense. It's not worthy of congressional consideration. It's a waste of time and taxpayer dollars, and I would urge the chair and majority members to exclude it from today's rule. It doesn't deserve to go to the floor. Ranking Member Scott, did you want to add anything?
I think you did a good job.
Okay, thank you. I yield back.
Thank you.
Thank you. Gentleman from Texas, recognized for any questions he may have.
Yeah, I appreciate the chair. I mean, look, the reality is whether the merits of this resolution are particularly strong or not, the resolution is speaking to a larger problem. Like whatever the argument is about the specifics of the resolution, it's addressing a problem where you've got communities across the country, particularly Texas, dealing with a crisis almost entirely of this president's making. That's just what we're dealing with. And we're the ones dealing with it every single day, right? I mean, we get a new piece of news every single day of some other event, of something that's occurred in Texas. We had on Friday, Texas troopers stopped an illegal alien from Mexico possessing a handgun and cocaine while smuggling a dozen other illegals in Uvalde County bound for San Antonio. I could list off hundreds of examples I get on a regular basis. My phone is lighting up every week from sheriffs and people in Texas dealing with this all the time. Schools that have to put the big blocks up to deal with bailouts and trucks and people going across the properties, ranches, fences cut, livestock out, all the stuff. It's not fake, it's real. It's literally happening every day. My phone, pictures, I get pictures every day from Texans dealing with it. I mean, at some point, Texas is gonna say, screw it, enough. We're gonna do whatever the hell we wanna do. And I'll be an advocate for that. Because the people in this Congress are ignoring the people of Texas. And by the way, the migrants getting abused. That's the truth. Talking about people who are admitted into this country, we're talking about the legal definition of admission, not the one app where you're processing people through a port of entry and just dumping them into the United States without having any idea when they return for a hearing on whether their asylum claim was legitimate in the first place, which it usually is not. That's the truth. No, you can shake your head all you want. We're the ones holding the goddamn bag in Texas. It's true. Talk to the dead people in Texas. Yeah, good, walk out. You don't like the rants? We don't like what's happening to Texas because of you and the president down the other end of Pennsylvania Avenue. That's the truth.
Mr. Chair, the gentlelady from Minnesota made an issue about not getting personal. I would urge the chair to...
All right, I'll retract to my colleagues on the other side of the aisle.
And by the way, there's a small committee room. We don't have to scream.
Look, the fact of the matter is I have people dying in my state as a direct consequence of what this federal government fails to do. Kids in my district dying from fentanyl pouring into the community. Schools overrun, hospitals overrun. People trying to figure out how to deal with what is happening because the federal government refuses to do its basic duty. You want to talk about the migrants? You want to talk about the stash house in Fort Worth that I mentioned last week, where a federal judge is talking about the extent to which the man sitting in Baltimore was paying $1,000 to have his wife and daughter sent up, but he was being held hostage to $23,000 while his wife and daughter and the guy in the stash house is saying, I'm going to rape your daughter? And that's what the guy's being told right up here in Baltimore? And that's in a federal filing by a federal judge talking about, these are the facts. This is what we're talking about every single day. And you have federal judges now moving stuff up and saying we have to upward depart from the actual sentencing guidelines. Like, sit down and talk to the people and the sheriffs in South Texas who are having to deal with this every day, and it's absolute chaos. And the people in Texas are fed up. And you talk about, well, what does the governor of Texas do? Or any other governor of Florida, dealing with what they're having to deal with the federal government failing to do its job? Of course, they've got to deal with things like what's happening in schools and whether the schools are going to be used to house people because we have an entirely broken system. But it's completely insane to ignore what's actually happening to the people of this country and the migrants in question. That's what absolutely and utterly blows my mind. I know the chairwoman agrees about what's happening and seeing what's happening to migrants across the country. The 856 dead migrants last year, the thousands of Americans dying from fentanyl, all of the things we've talked about. They're real. These are real human beings. It's not fake what the federal judge put in an order just 2 weeks ago. It's not fake. It's real. And it's a product of a completely broken system in which we refuse to actually secure the border of the United States, which is our fundamental job. And have the Secretary of Homeland Security come before the committee and say, yes, we have operational control of the border, which he did. He looked me in the eye in the House Judiciary Committee and said, yes, we have operational control of the border. And then testifying in front of a Senate committee months later, he said, oh no, not according to the definition of the Secure Fence Act. Nobody has control under that definition. Well, which is it? I had literally the statute sitting behind me telling you don't have operational control of the border. You say, well, this resolution doesn't matter. Well, this resolution is another effort to try to say, look, there are consequences to the communities around this country. That's the problem. You have 50 states, thousands of communities who are left holding the bag. And then we hear things like, oh, don't worry, people admitted. Well, they're admitted by definition because they got into the country. That's absurd. There's 3,000 to 4,000 a day right now being apprehended, while somewhere similar to that number, although we don't have the most recent data because it changes by the week, and you have to go ask them, probably 3,000 to 4,000 coming through the one app, but it's like pulling teeth to get data out of the administration. But we know there's thousands either being shoved through the ports of entry through the one app, or thousands being apprehended between the ports of entry, while fentanyl continues to pour into our country. So yes, we have resolutions that are from committees that aren't directly in the jurisdiction, for example, the Homeland Security or Judiciary, because this is touching every aspect of our life. And we have things like schools that are having to deal with it. I don't know if the gentlelady has anything to add to that.
Well, I thank you for expressing the concerns that you have from the state of Texas, but it certainly isn't just the state of Texas that's concerned. I do want to say for the record that the phrase aliens not admitted is the legal language to describe those not legally admitted to the United States. This came up as an issue a few minutes ago. So I think it's important that we make sure that when we do a resolution, that we use the appropriate language, whether some people think the resolution does anything or not. We're determined at least to use the proper language. And I thank the gentleman for his spirited defense of doing the right thing in our country. Thank you.
I thank the gentlelady. The people of Texas are past the point of being able to accept what we're getting out of the federal government. Well past the point. I yield back.
The gentlelady from New Mexico is recognized for any questions she may have.
Thank you so much, Chairman, for the recognition. And I would just note that this non-binding resolution does not address in any way all the things that our colleague, who is now leaving, yelled about for the last 7 minutes, because it does not address fentanyl. This Congress has refused to address fentanyl. It has not addressed immigration. This Congress, the Republicans have refused to address immigration reform. What it does do, though, is express an opinion that I believe is contrary to Americans' basic sense of decency and humanity. Our basic humanity, our asylum laws, and scripture all guide us to be better than this. In the New Testament, Matthew says, I was hungry and you gave me food. I was thirsty and you gave me drink. I was a stranger and you welcomed me. Deuteronomy, the Old Testament counsels that you shall also love the stranger, for you were once strangers in Egypt. America's asylum and refugee laws were written after World War II, when we turned back to St. Louis carrying 937 Jews seeking refuge from the Holocaust. We know what happened to most of them. So I am very saddened that today we take up this non-binding resolution, which, as the chairwoman has said, is a priority of the majority. This is a priority of the Republican majority. And the language says it is necessary to keep children safe. Let's talk about safety. Last week, Republicans passed a bill to allow people to use high-powered weapons with shoulder braces without enhanced background checks and safety regulations. Ranking Member Scott, remind us once again, what is the biggest killer of school children in America?
Firearms.
Firearms.
Firearms, and if we're going to talk about school safety, you got to talk about guns.
You got to talk about guns, but we're not really talking about guns. What I'd also point out is the manner in which it does target immigrants. Undocumented immigrants toil in the hot sun to pick the food that we eat. They take on the hardest, most dangerous jobs in the slaughterhouses, caring for our elders, caring for our children. They build our houses in the hottest places, in the most dangerous places. They fill in the gaps. Indeed, more than 5 million undocumented immigrants, including more than half of all DACA recipients and the majority of TPS holders, are considered essential critical infrastructure workers. America does not work without immigrants. When I meet with contractors, ranchers, home builders, and so many others, they want us to get immigration reform done. But that's not what we're doing today. We are honoring Immigration Heritage Month with this mean-spirited, non-binding resolution. And before I close, I want to talk about another example about how schools serve as shelter. Last year, during New Mexico's largest wildfire, schools opened up their gyms to those fleeing the fire. We know that this happens across the country in hurricanes and disaster after disaster. Those who vote for this resolution would give their opinion in support of taking funding away from those schools if there were any undocumented among those sleeping on those cots, saddened by the conditions they find themselves in. That is what this resolution expresses an opinion about. Our students, our nation, we are better than this. We are a moral people, and we know we should be better. And with this, I yield back, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Gentleman from South Carolina is recognized for any questions he may have.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, after hearing my friends on the other side of the aisle talk about how, the immigration issue has not been solved, and can sit there with a straight face and say that, this is humane to let everybody from every country come in, and it helps the workforce, is just really not living in the real world. You tell that mother and that father who've lost young ones from fentanyl that's pouring in across the border. You tell that police officer that when he arrests that illegal with illegal drugs, and they themselves are subject to not only contamination with the fentanyl, but not knowing what background the person that they're stopping has, whether he's a murderer, whether he's a pedophile, doesn't matter. It's insane what's happening with this administration and what they're doing. And it's purely intentional, and it's for political reasons. It could not be anything else. That's why they're getting driver's licenses. That's why they're getting put on the public payroll. And the fact that we've got a vice president who's still laughing at it, the fact we've got a president who really hadn't been to the border, that really shows the damage that's being done. I don't know how you walk it back. To let probably anywhere from 5 to 10 million before this administration is out of office, hopefully. We are a nation of immigrants, but it's legal immigration. It's not illegal immigration. And it's just not being done, and America will long pay a price for what's happening in this country. So Chips, I heard just a portion of it. He expresses just the outrage that many of us have, that is entirely avoidable, as it was under the Trump administration. And now it's a tragedy the country is going to take a long time if it can recover. And we're just in two different universes with my good friends from the other aisle, side of the aisle, and those of us who think we're a nation of borders, we're a sovereign nation, or we were at one time. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Gentleman from New York is recognized for any questions he may have.
Chairwoman Fox, some folks on the other side of the aisle have decried this resolution as a pointless waste of time. Do you agree with that?
I do not. We spent time in the committee to hear it, and I'm bringing it to rules, and we're going to bring it to the floor. And I'm very sensitive about waste of time.
No. Thank you, Dr. Fox. I don't agree with that either. And as a sole member of this committee who represents the state that inspired this resolution, any action by Congress to oppose what President Biden, Governor Hochul, and Mayor Adams are doing is absolutely welcome. In fact, 5 of the 7 counties in my district have declared a state of emergency, citing a lack of resources to handle this massive influx of migrants. The southern tier of New York is not urban, it's not wealthy. What President Biden, Governor Hochul, and Mayor Adams are doing here is placing an unbearable strain on the resources of communities. Chairwoman Fox, do you think it's compassionate to the American people to foist an economic burden onto the backs of communities that struggle to afford basic services?
I do not think it's compassionate.
I agree with you as well. As you know, reports have shown that HHS lost contact with more than 85,000 migrant children brought to this country illegally in the last 2 years and then relocated into the interior. Only 37% of these unaccompanied minors have ended up in the care of their own parents. Ranking Member Scott, do you think that losing track of 85,000 unaccompanied minors is compassionate?
When Secretary Becerra testified before the committee, he said that they were not missing, that they were placed appropriately, and the...
I'll listen to cries for guys. I'll take my time back.
HHS loses jurisdiction.
I'll take my time back. I'll listen to cries for compassion from my colleagues on the other side of the aisle when they, along with the administration, secure the actual border. We've seen the results of the Biden administration's failure to uphold our laws and leave our borders wide open. Crime has skyrocketed. Fentanyl is killing thousands of Americans. Human beings, including young children, are being trafficked across our border and into the interior as this administration loses track of them. And now our communities, like those in Cattaraugus and Chautauqua counties in New York State, are now seeing their resources stretched to the breaking point to deal with an influx of illegal immigrants. None of this is compassionate. None of this is humane. I strongly support this resolution, and I'm a proud co-sponsor of what I believe is one of the many steps our Republican majority is taking to return sanity to our border and force this administration to once and for all uphold our immigration laws, and I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Any additional comments or questions?
I do, but I'll hold it.
God bless you, Mr. Ranking Member. With that, I want to thank both the chairman and the ranking member for their patience and good humor of being with us today, and our witnesses are excused.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Just to advise the committee, we're waiting on our next 2 and last panel. Hopefully they'll be here shortly. We'd like to welcome our 3rd panel. We're still waiting for 1 member, but in hopes of expediting the hearing, Representative Warren Davidson is here representing the Committee on Financial Services. Representative Davidson, welcome to the Rules Committee. We'd certainly welcome your testimony.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you for all the Rules Committee members. I have a somewhat of an appreciation for the demands on time that it takes, and some of you guys are real gluttons for punishment because you continue to do it for many years, but it's obviously a very important committee to how we accomplish our work as a body. So with that, let me explain the bill before us, the Middle Class Borrower Protection Act. Earlier this month, Fannie Mae's home purchase sentiment index showed us that only 19% of consumers believe it's currently an excellent time to buy a home. Now, I'm sure this is a shock to no one as we continue to see high home prices coinciding with high mortgage rates. In fact, CPI estimates that 70% of the consumer price index inflation is attributed to housing. So Americans who are looking for a home remain skeptical about current market conditions. While we can spend all day discussing why home prices and mortgage rates are as high as they are, I want to talk about the bill, the Middle Class Borrower Protection Act, which undoes a bad policy that was implemented at the worst possible time. So I'm talking about the loan level pricing adjustments that the Federal Housing Finance Agency, FHFA, put into effect on May 1st of this year. This policy essentially implemented a tax on people with good credit for redistribution to people with bad credit. Loan level pricing adjustments are upfront fees used in mortgage lending to account for different risk factors associated with individual loans. Ultimately, LLPA adjusts the final interest rate charged on a mortgage loan based on specific risk characteristics. The most notable factors affecting these rates would be the mortgage's underlying loan to value and the buyer's credit score. While fees may be necessary for Fannie and Freddie to raise capital and adequately hedge against credit risk, the adjustments announced by FHFA would disproportionately hurt individuals with credit scores of 680 or higher. So to put that in perspective, the average credit score is around 710. That threshold is important because nearly 19 out of 20 Americans have credit scores of 680 or above. Therefore, most Americans would be hurt by these new fees. Most Americans who finance a home with less than 20% down will see higher upfront fees. However, those with credit scores below 680 will benefit from lower rates than the prior LLP assessments charged. This fee change violates the fundamental principle of risk-based pricing. And, you know, the fundamental principle is that lower risk borrowers should pay lower prices than higher risk borrowers do for access to credit. And while that's still true if you take them in aggregate, it's not true of the new fees that were assessed. And that's what this bill undoes. It doesn't undo all LLPAs, it undoes the new fee that was assessed in this redistributive way. Most Americans who finance a home are financing with FHFA loans through Fannie or Freddie. And despite the FHFA's opaque approach to assessing this price adjustment, the results of their new policy speak for themselves. This bill would reinstate the old price levels that were in effect before May 1st, while also directing the Government Accounting Office to complete an independent study of the process and data used by FHFA to change the loan level price adjustment fees, including the impact of those changes on the safety and soundness of the GSEs, Fannie and Freddie, and then report to Congress within 1 year. FHFA would be prohibited from changing the LLPAs until 90 days after the report, after which it would be required to, 1, follow a basic government agency notice and comment procedure for making new changes, and 2, ensure that future fee adjustments be made based on the actual risk posed by the mortgage. Finally, FHFA would be prohibited from imposing any new fee on borrowers based on their debt-to-income ratio, which was part of their original proposal. So if you have lots of income and little debt, they were going to charge you a higher fee so that you could pay for, help subsidize people who have low income and high debt. Arguably, we've tried that before, and it didn't turn out very well. And then lastly, they withdrew that, but they also announced a request for a public comment period, which was absent. So they got a lot of feedback once they started implementing this bill, or this new policy, and this bill undoes what they did and requires them essentially to do it the right way. So as Americans continue to combat high inflation, mortgage rates are hovering near 7%, and it could not be a worse time to leverage these LLPAs to pursue their political agenda. The Middle Class Borrower Protection Act of 2023 would relieve Americans from the FHFA's politicized actions by reinstating the prior pricing. The wrong policy at the wrong time requires the right legislative fix. That's what this bill does. And I look forward to moving this through the House. Now, we'll note, over the weekend, late Friday, the Congressional Budget Office came up with a score. And what they came up with is by us turning this off with this bill, they say it's going to cost $1.8 billion. Now, this is effectively a tax that bureaucrats imposed on people that are getting Fannie and Freddie mortgages. So what the rules of the House would say, that, well, you have to find a pay for, because the CBO has deemed, with no real documentation, this would be addressed if we could move my CBO Show Your Work Act so that you would actually see their work, and so would everyone else. But they say it's going to cost $1.8 billion. Now, granted, if FHFA hadn't implemented this price, well, the $1.8 billion wouldn't be getting collected in the first place. So now they say if we want to turn something off that these bureaucrats have turned on, it's our job to find the money. I don't think we should take the bait. But if you guys, as the Rules Committee, say, no, we got to find a way to pay for it, we've been snookered again by the people that have conducted this long march through our institutions, and we decide we're going to be the ones that impose a tax, let us at least impose a tax that's even-handed and not redistributive. So there's a policy that imposes a 10 basis point fee that is already being repealed. And this just adds one more year to it. And so for collecting that 10 basis point fee on LLPAs, on GSE originated loans, it would apply to every single person equally, 10 basis points, 0.1% extra for your loan. You could cover for it and actually net a little bit more money, like $5 billion for 1 year. I don't think we should take the bait, because fundamentally that means American people, again, 10 years out into the future, 2033, would have one more year of a policy that a lot of us probably don't even agree with. So as the Rules Committee, I guess the task falls to you as to how to apply the House rules. I found a pay for, but I don't think we should take the bait that somehow we have to come up with our own way to confiscate wealth from the American people that they weren't getting confiscated from just prior to this rule taking effect. With that, I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much. Ranking Member Waters, welcome to the Rules Committee. You're recognized for your testimony.
Thank you, Chair Cole and Ranking Member McGovern and members of the committee for the opportunity to testify today on H.R. 3564. Let me just start out by saying I'm surprised because this is a bill that is being described by Mr. Davidson that will really hurt middle-class families. Let me try and go through this to clear up some of the information that I think Mr. Davidson has shared with you. Unfortunately, there's been a lot of misinformation about this bill, which is why I basically call it the MAGA Housing Scam Act. Republicans claim it will help middle-class families, when in reality, it would do just the opposite. Now, this issue is complicated, so I want to take some time to break down this bill, H.R. 3564, would cancel certain changes made by the Federal Housing Finance Agency, or FHFA. FHFA is the agency that regulates Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, also known as the enterprises. The enterprises guarantee single-family mortgages by charging a fee for this guarantee, known as a loan level price adjustment, or LLPA. The fee amount depends on loan and borrower characteristics, including down payment amount, income, and factors representing credit worthiness. The cost of LLPAs is ultimately added on to the home buyer's interest rates. Before Director Thompson took over FHFA, these fees were unfair because they charged middle-class borrowers with smaller down payments more than higher income borrowers with higher down payments, even when those middle-class borrowers had excellent credit. This made no sense because those middle-class borrowers were not riskier than higher income borrowers. They already purchase private mortgage insurance, which is required when the borrower puts down less than 20% towards the home purchase. That also protects the enterprise against the risk of borrower default. So those borrowers were unfairly charged more to cover their risk when they had already obtained private mortgage insurance. So you see what I'm saying? Everybody pays fees, and it depends on your circumstances, the way these fees are calculated. If you have 20% down payment or more, then you don't have to have mortgage insurance. But if you have less than 20%, you have to have mortgage insurance. When you add the fees and the mortgage insurance, then you're paying more as a middle-class person than a wealthy person. And so that's why I bring to your attention it's going to hurt middle-income people. And let me further describe that. Whether it's with inflation or maybe it is not the income that middle-class people should be making because of a lack of increases in pay, etc. Middle-income people are oftentimes now more than ever having to get mortgage insurance. They cannot afford to accumulate that 20%. Maybe at some point in time when there wasn't inflation or when, the prices, period, were not as high as they are now, or they were making adequate money or the income was adequate. But now, middle-class people working have to have mortgage insurance because they can't afford to accumulate that 20%. When you add the fees that everybody's charged based on your circumstances to the mortgage insurance, then you're paying more than that wealthy person who could afford to make that 20%. And that should be clear. So let me go on. Director Thompson's recent changes corrected this inequity to ensure that middle-class home buyers who have worked hard to build their credit aren't charged higher fees, but because they aren't as rich as someone else. Unfortunately, you listen to Fox News, they launched a misinformation campaign claiming that FHFA was helping lower credit score borrowers at the expense of higher credit score borrowers. This is simply untrue. As I just explained, FHFA's charges helped credit-worthy middle-class borrowers, not those with lower credit scores. This has nothing to do with credit scores at all. And so what Fox News was telling you and having you believe that somehow people with higher credit scores were paying more and it was offsetting or basically supporting people with lower credit scores has nothing to do with that at all. This is about fees that everybody pays based on your circumstances, the kind of loan that you're getting, and it's about mortgage insurance, nothing to do with the credit scores. And so this is simply untrue what you're being told by some Republicans and by Fox News. As I just explained, FHFA's changes help credit-worthy middle-class borrowers, not those with lower credit scores. And don't just take it from me. Take it from the witnesses that Republicans invited to testify on the issue. Former FHA Director Ed DeMarco stated these pricing changes are, quote, reasonably aligned with credit risk after accounting for the new capital framework and the cost of private mortgage insurance, quote, unquote. Let me be clear. By reversing FHA's recent fee changes, this bill would raise mortgage costs for middle-class borrowers, including for first-time, rural, and manufactured home buyers, and it would unfairly reduce fees for wealthy borrowers. This bill is a scam. I also want to put the size of LLPAs into context. This fee represents less than 1% of the overall cost of buying a home, and FHA's recent changes have a modest effect, a mere 0.5% on average for a 700 FICO credit score borrower who puts 40% down towards a $325,000 mortgage. Their monthly mortgage payment would be $2,500. This LLPA would also add $20, which is less than 1% of the total monthly payment. Like I said, this is a scam. Meanwhile, Republicans are doing absolutely nothing to address rising housing costs, which are a key driver of inflation. Where is the outrage over the fact that more than 500,000 people are homeless or on any given night? But Republicans aren't addressing this. Nationwide, there's a shortage of nearly 14 million housing units for rent and purchase, and I've not seen a single Republican-led bill to buy any housing to meet that demand. I'm also surprised that Republicans are moving a bill that strips the enterprises of capital. They have long called for the enterprises to build more capital. HFA's fee changes are designed to help build more capital. And so by reversing those changes, the enterprises would have less capital. Let's not forget, Republicans took our entire economy to the brink of catastrophe over the federal deficit, and now they're moving a bill that would add to it. The same way Republicans had no problem passing Trump's tax scam to benefit the wealthy, they have no problem passing this bill to pad the pockets of wealthy home buyers who always pay lower interest rates and less than home buyers with lower levels of wealth. In fact, according to a Congressional Budget Office estimate, this bill will cost $1.8 billion in lost revenue to the enterprises. In order to offset this lost revenue, Republicans have proposed an amendment to pay for the cost of this bill that would increase the net price of homeownership by $3 billion over 10 years. Now, this business of pay for, this is a Republican advocacy. Pay for. Don't propose anything that's going to cost more money that you're not able to find the money to pay for it. And you're saying, ignore it. Don't worry, my Republican friends. I know that we demand pay for, but let's just ignore this one. Let's not have to pay for it. And these numbers are from the nonpartisan CBO. This bill, when combined with the amendment to pay for its cost, would leave all future home buyers worse off. So I'm disappointed that Republicans are choosing to peddle untruths and amplify misinformation about helping middle-class borrowers. I'm not surprised when they're led to believe this by their leadership or by even the former President of the United States. In closing, I'm urging the committee to make all Democrat amendments in order and to reject the MAGA housing scam. And I'll be happy to answer any questions, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you both for your testimony. Chair has no questions at this time. Dr. Burgess, recognize for any questions you may have.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. It does seem like a transfer payment. And golly, the last time the federal government got involved in 2007 or 2008, I recall it being pretty unpleasant. So, Mr. Davidson, is there any reason to have that concern?
Well, when Director Thompson came in, she highlighted part of the reason that they wanted to raise revenue was to get more capital into Fannie and Freddie. And frankly, if they don't get more capital, they can't exit conservatorship by the standards that have been proposed. I will note that we are waiting for Treasury Secretary to provide a plan to get out of conservatorship that was due in September of 2021, and we still don't have that. So we will continue to address that with Treasury, but they haven't been able to say, well, how much revenue would be collected by this? Maybe now that they have the CBO score, they'll know, but for 2 years, 1.8 billion, apparently, because turning it off would cost us money that they want us to make up. So they decided to impose this fee to raise revenue, and then they decided to pay for it in a redistributive way. Even if you listen to the ranking members, talking points about the bill, the score isn't just based on credit scores. It is based on the loan-to-value ratio. And essentially, she's upset that people who have more equity in the house would have less risk. And yeah, if you have a lot of equity in the house, there's less risk that the homeowner is going to default, because even if they lose their job and can't make a payment or anything else, and the housing price crashes, and you put, say, 30% down, well, there's almost no chance you're going to default on the loan. You put 3% down, well, there's a chance that you're going to have a hard time covering the full value of the loan. That's risk-based pricing. And this proposal that they put in, just like the ranking member wants, redistributes that and says, well, we feel bad for you, so we're going to take people that have not even average credit, above 680. Average credit's 610. So 19 out of 20 people have a credit score above 680. And so they will, if they use a GSE loan, will be getting a higher fee than they were prior to May 1st. And so, the rebuttal says, let's look at all of history. And the reality is, let's just look at what happened. We're only talking about the change here. I'm not talking about all loan level price adjustments. And the last thing I'll say is, if you look through the Democrat amendments, all of them would collect less revenue, and there's no offset, no pay-go in there for any of their amendments. So for a rebuttal to say, oh, well, you don't have pay-go, well, you can. I mean, we've offered it up, and if that's where the Rules Committee feels we need to, by all means, adopt the manager's amendment. But I do say that I think it would be a correct bill as drafted and as passed through committee without the manager's amendment.
I thank you for that observation.
I beg your pardon?
I said I thank the gentleman for his observation. I was just turning to you for your thoughts.
Well, thank you very much. First of all, let me just say that it has been determined that this would cost $1.8 billion. I'd like to, if I may, engage my colleague and ask, how much does your bill raise?
But the bill, as drafted, doesn't raise any money. As proposed with the manager's amendment, we estimate between $3 and $5 billion, but it depends on the flow. And as we see in the market today, lots of people are choosing with the higher rates to not pay the fees that come with Fannie and Freddie mortgages, and they're choosing Federal Home Loan Bank mortgages.
So with the amendments.
So if you had 30% of the market choosing, a GSE mortgage, that's different than what we had just prior to this rule going into effect, which is around 60% of the market was choosing Fannie and Freddie, and now you're seeing behavior change as rates are rising.
Why does your amendments, the manager's amendments, raise $3 to $5 million? Billion, I'm sorry.
Well, because we have a pay-go rule that says if the CBO deems something, then we have to pay for it.
Yeah, but why, the CBO says $1 billion even, which is, and you're saying your amendments are $3.5 billion, why?
Because we just add 1 year to the 10 basis point charge that came on to help raise capital. And if the goal was to raise capital requirements by Director Thompson, she had two prongs to her proposal. First was this debt, this redistribution based on credit scores.
Not on credit scores.
And the other part was the redistribution based on debt to income. They withdrew the debt to income, and so we don't know for sure where they're going to come up with next to raise revenue if they really do feel
So
like
you
they have
have,
to.
you have amendments higher than.
Yeah, maybe I'd better just reclaim my time.
Okay,
Fascinating discussion, and I appreciate both of you being here.
Okay,
Mr.
thank
Chairman, I'm
you.
going to yield back.
thank you.
Thank you very much. Ranking members recognized for any questions you may have.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, I just want to associate myself with Ranking Member Waters' remarks. I don't represent a district of the rich and famous. The majority of people in my district are in middle income and struggling in the lower incomes. And the way I understand this bill, the impact on them, is that it would increase mortgage fees charged to middle income borrowers and decrease fees charged to wealthy borrowers. And the way I look at it is it makes it harder for middle-class Americans to purchase a home, and that's not why I'm here. I'm here to help try to assist my constituents, and let me just say that for the record. I just want to say you're the second panel, Mr. Davidson, that came up here to kind of essentially bash CBO, I guess I now understand why you and the person on the previous panel would want to bash the hardworking, nonpartisan experts at CBO, because I think they just keep on giving you bad news, but they give you accurate news. And I mean, this bill would increases the deficit by $348 million. No, I'm sorry, this bill would increase it by $1.8 billion, I'm sorry. The previous bill that we had would increase the deficit by $348 million. HR 1, which you guys brought up, the Lower Energy Costs Act, would increase the deficit by $0.4 billion. HR 2, the Secure the Borders Act of 2023, would increase the deficit by $6.1 billion. HR 23, the Family and Small Business Taxpayer Protection Act, would increase the deficit by about $114 million. The bill we did on guns last week would increase the deficit by $506 million. You guys like to spend and don't really care about the impact on our deficit when it's on things that you like, but you pick and choose when it's spending on things that help people. You all complain, and I just pointed out because we just went through this ordeal where some of your members kind of revolted and insisted that we come up with this deal in order to increase the debt ceiling, as if somehow spending is so out of control and you need to control it. I just gave you an example of a number of bills, including the bill that we are dealing with here today, in which you are adding, huge amounts to our deficit. And I want it to be part of the public record because I think there's an inconsistency and even a hypocrisy here with, on one hand, saying, the deficit is out of control, and then we go down this road where we're being asked to ignore the deficit as if it somehow doesn't matter. I just think there's an irony here. Yeah, happy to yield.
Yeah. This bill doesn't add anything to the United States government's deficit. It doesn't collect revenue that would go to Fannie and Freddie.
CBO,
so that is not what the CBO said. That the score goes to the money that is collected by the GSEs, Fannie and Freddie. This isn't going to pay down the debt. It isn't going to service the interest. It's not going to do a damn thing except go to Fannie and Freddie, unless somehow FHFA continues to do what they've done, which is siphon the profit off of the GSEs, which they confiscated and nationalized and took away the equity that was there, and then fund their own operations out of it instead of letting them build capital so that they can exit conservatorship.
Yeah. Well, it's an interesting way to try to deny what CBO stated, that there's a cost to this bill.
If you talk about CBO, why don't we trust them? When we passed student debt takeover, the federal government took over student debt as part of Dodd-Frank. They said that the federal takeover of student lending would save $63 billion. The reality is we're expecting defaults of around $500 billion Why should we trust CBO?
Well,
They haven't
why
earned it.
Why do we even ask for a CBO score if it means nothing? Because CBO was invoked quite a bit during the debate on the, debate over the debt ceiling. I don't, Ranking Member Waters, do you want anything to add?
Well, simply to say that we all abide by pay for now. I mean, led by Republicans. I mean, I don't like it, but that's what we do. And I'm shocked to have Mr. Davidson come in and say, let's just ignore it in this instance. We don't have to agree to pay for it because of I have my thoughts about what I think this bill is, and what I'm trying to do is convince other Republicans that somehow wealthy people are being charged a lot more money to offset what they're not getting from middle-class people or people with less money. I tell you, all you have to look at is you have to look at those who don't have a 20% down payment. They get mortgage insurance. And right now, and before this change, the cost of their fees and mortgage insurance was higher than what people who have 20% or 30%. And now this equalizes everything. And guess what? It doesn't cost $1 billion. That's your bill.
Well, let me just, I ask you to consent to insert into the record the Congressional Budget Office cost estimate, basically stating that this bill would add $1.8 billion to the deficit. It's here in black and white. Maybe you don't believe your eyes, but it's here. That's what they say. And you add that to all the other bills that we're told, don't worry about it. We're not going to trust the CBO. And then it's just then hard to then take my friend seriously when they say, when they use the deficit and the debt as a justification to cut programs that help the poorest and the most vulnerable in this country. There's just something fundamentally wrong with that. And on this bill, again, the way I understand it, is that it would increase mortgage fees charged to middle-income borrowers, but decrease fees charged to wealthy borrowers. This is a pretty hefty price to pay. With that, I yield back my time.
Thank you. Gentlelady from Minnesota is recognized for any questions she may have.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I guess I would just like to say that, everybody's talking about this $1.8 billion. I think what we need to point out is this would save home buyers $1.8 billion if it is the case that it is because someone's seeing an increase in their fees if there is this kind of, and so this would save that money from those home buyers. But I guess I'm just wondering, Chairman Davidson, if these changes, from a lender's perspective, because, we got to think about that, does it affect the risk of lending to a less creditworthy individual from a lender's perspective?
Yeah, I think that when you look at the concerns that were in the market, the ones that they really had concerns about were the debt-to-income ratio, because that clearly affects lower-income borrowers. The reality is, this you don't even really know what the income level is based off of this, because you can have people who getting by paycheck to paycheck, and they're responsible. They're low-income borrowers, way below the median, but they paid their bills on time, and they live on less than they really need to get by. They just meet their needs, and that's it. So they have great credit scores. You have people that have low income and 800 credit scores. On the other side, you could have people that have lots of income, and because they can afford to be somewhat irresponsible because they got a lot of income, they got a lot of cash in the bank, they might not pay their bills on time. There might be all kinds of irresponsible behavior, and they wind up with terrible credit scores. So this bill, or this rule that FHFA implemented based on credit scores, really doesn't go to income at all. It is tied to the amount of money that you put down on the home, and to the extent it is, it does the exact wrong thing, is it subsidizes people who have low down payments who would inherently be at more risk of default, and it penalizes people who put bigger down payments down to help subsidize the people with lower down payments.
And so there is still, a certain amount of risk.
There is a greater risk. Now, to some extent, this redistributes that risk, but it is non-market activity, and it creates economic distortions in the marketplace as well.
But I think what we're doing is we're actually increasing the cost of credit across the spectrum by going through with this change. And it looks like you agree with that. And so I appreciate that. And with that, I yield back.
Thank you. Gentlelady from Pennsylvania is recognized for any questions she may have.
Thank you. So we're talking about Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac and the fees they provide. And as I understand it, they were established to provide liquidity for the single and multifamily mortgage markets, not for the investment mortgage market or the second home mortgage market. So I'm a little concerned that what we're talking about here is rescinding rules that would help single families and families actually purchase their homes. But Ranking Member Waters, could you comment generally, just helping us to clear up what
I'd
this
like to
actually
do
does?
is I'd like to give a clear definition of what loan level price adjustments are, or LLPAs, also known as upfront fees. The enterprises generate capital by charging lenders fees on mortgages that they purchase. These fees are referred to as guarantee fees, which include both upfront fees, often referred to as loan level price adjustments, and ongoing fees. Okay, let's go to when were the LLPAs created and how is the fee level determined? FHFA first implemented LLPAs in 2008 in order to help the enterprises raise more capital. LLPAs are charged to lenders by the enterprises for each loan that they purchase and are passed on to borrowers as part of the cost of originating enterprise-backed mortgages. These fees are charged based on the loan type and characteristics of a borrower's credit profile, such as loan to value, that is LTV ratios. Question: what are the effects of LLPAs on borrowers? For the last decade, LLPAs resulted in lower wealth and lower income home buyers being charged more for a mortgage than wealthier home income buyers. Director Thompson's changes undo this inequity by eliminating subsidies long applied to wealthier borrowers at the expense of borrowers with lower wealth. And so, again, I tell you where the higher charges came from, and I'll reiterate. When you are evaluated, and everybody pays according to their circumstance and kind of loan and everything that goes into that. When you don't have 20%, as a lot of our middle income people don't have anymore, you have to have mortgage insurance, but you still got to pay your fees that have been determined. And so when you put that fee from the mortgage insurance on top of the fees that everybody have to pay based on their circumstances, you're paying more than the people who may have had more money down when they paid, and this equalizes everything.
I think on that we agree. It is redistributive, and I understand you like it, and we don't.
Just reclaiming my time. There's no question here that folks who are lower income homeowners, these are still people who are creditworthy, correct?
They're creditworthy. So that's why I started out by saying this hasn't anything to do with credit scores.
Okay.
They are creditworthy. They just don't have 20% down.
Okay.
And then they have to get mortgage insurance on top of the fees that everybody have to pay. And so that means that they're paying more than, the wealthiest people who had 20% or 25% payment down. That's all it is.
So there are policy choices that are being made here, and the policy choice that this rule would revert to pre-2008 recession is one that encourages home ownership over perhaps investment or second homes.
Absolutely.
So it's not subsidizing
No.
wealth.
No.
Okay.
So that it is not subsidizing wealth. Yeah.
Okay, that does seem to be a consistent theme in the bills we've seen here. When there has been a cost to the federal government, the bills that we're seeing the House majority bring forward consistently provide for corporate welfare, tax breaks for rich individuals, et cetera. And we just have a fundamental disagreement about where those policy breaks should occur. Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you.
Thank you. Gentleman from South Carolina is recognized for any questions he may have.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Waters, let me just tell you, one, I think you first addressed the fact that affordable housing, we hadn't addressed it, or it's somebody's fault. You know why housing is not affordable now? There are no battery-powered dump trucks. There are no battery-powered airplanes to fly people back and forth. Gasoline, fossil fuels are still the rule of the day in America. You're not going to get rid of oil and natural gas. The supply chain for getting materials to the job site, it's just not there. I can't get meters for housing. We've canceled more housing projects of developments because you can't get stuff. Time is money. And then you keep saying middle class, rich, middle class. I know a lot of people, if you look at their balance sheet, if you look at the net income, they choose to pay mortgage guarantee insurance because they have their equity tied up in other projects. So they choose to pay the mortgage guarantee insurance. It's risk-based. If you own a rental house and are wanting to sell it, you would want to self-finance, you would have a difference in rate for those who put down 20% or more versus those who put down 3%. It's just like Congressman Davidson said, it's risk-based, and it should be. If you self-financed, you would have to have a difference in the interest rate. Now, Maxine, you're not doubting that those with lower credit scores and lower down payments are paying less than those with higher scores and more down payments. You know, I mean, you're not disputing that, are you?
No, I'm only talking about those who are making less than a 20% down payment but had adequate credit scores. I'm not talking about anybody with lower credit scores. These are people who have the right amount of right credit scores, not people with less credit scores at all.
But
No.
So you're saying those with a higher credit score and more down payment are going to be paying the same, or going to be paying more than those with a less credit score and less down payment?
No, you take into consideration that there are fees that everybody pays. And when you are evaluated based on what your mortgage is and all other kinds of things, then you have a fee amount. But when you put on top of that the mortgage insurance, then those people who didn't have the 20% are paying more than those people who had 20% or more.
Why is that wrong?
Why is it wrong?
Yeah.
It is wrong because what you have is people who say that I've not been able, I can afford a mortgage every month, but I've not been able to save up 20%. And so I know I have to get mortgage insurance, and it's going to cost me some money to get it.
As it should.
And it's going to cost me so much money that when I add it to the other fees that you're charging me, I'm paying more for the interest rates than the person who had more money to pay down.
Yeah, but in the real world, I mean, I see them all the time. If you don't have 20% down payment, whether you've got your equity tied up somewhere else, you're going to pay a higher fee through the MGIC insurance. You just are, and you should. Anybody should. And forget middle class, rich, poor. It's people up for the whole spectrum. What you're saying is it's just a redistribution is what this is. And I'll tell you,
it is not redistribution.
Jim Brown who recently died, and I'm going to get the book. It's like saying, Jim Brown, you had all these scores that you did but we're going to take away some of the touchdowns and give to somebody who didn't.
No,
who did not
that's
have it.
not
That's
a good
exactly what
no.
you're, Maxine.
No, it's-
I promise you, that's exactly what
No,
you're saying.
that is not. That is
Mr. Davidson, am I
absolutely not.
missing something?
No, and I think that to illustrate the point, you could say that the same person decides to buy two properties, right? And one of the properties, let's say they're both $100,000 homes. One of them is going to be, he's going to put $50,000 in cash down on it and get a separate mortgage. Well, you're going to pay a lower fee because you got 50% equity in the deal. The other one, he just puts the minimum down, 3%. And if you look at the table that we submitted in here as part of this, if you're only putting 3% down, you do have to buy mortgage insurance, right? Because you should. The risk of the default, even for somebody who's multimillionaire, on the property that's got $100,000 mortgage in it and only $3,000 down payment, you owe $97,000 on a $100,000 house, your risk of that mortgage is much higher than your risk on a $50,000 mortgage on another $100,000 property. The same borrower, same person, two different properties, they have different risk, and they should be priced differently. It has nothing to do with the income of the person, but the way that they created this table, it is also tied to your credit score. And that is the other part that's redistributive. It is bad policy. It wasn't well thought out. And our bill simply says, go back and think about it the right way. And we give GAO the mandate to go and do a study. And so then you have to do the rule notice. You know, they did this the wrong way. They implemented the policy, and then they got a bunch of pushback from the market, and they said, you know what? We should get feedback from the public. Well, no, why don't you get feedback from the public up front and then implement the policy? Because we could have told you this was a bad idea, and the minute that we did, they dropped at least the worst idea, which was the debt-to-income portion. They continue to cling to this idea that it already took effect May 1st, and this bill just turns that off. And the idea of turning something off that shouldn't have been turned on in the first place creates some obligation for us to pick up the tab. It's not adding to the deficit. It's a bad score. And at a minimum, the CBO should have to show their work. So I hope it helps build one more piece in the evidence file while we eventually pass my CBO Show Your Work Act.
Well, I just say we deal with this all the time, and I can't tell you the number of high-income borrowers who've got terrible credit scores. They get, for whatever reason, they make a lot of money. They don't pay their bills on time. I will tell you that hourly mechanic who works with us, he got a perfect credit score. Now, he can't make, for the inflation and the things that this administration is doing to this country at this time, no, he's stretched thin now. He pays his bills on time. Now, he couldn't afford that mechanic I'm talking about couldn't afford a 20% down payment. It's just things are tight now, but he goes into it with his eyes open. He pays a fee, just like that physician who overspends. If with a terrible credit score, he's going to have to pay a higher fee. There's no difference in credit card fees. 36% credit card fees are there because it's risk-based, and you don't have a mortgage. You don't sign a mortgage on a credit card. You walk away. And as Warren says, it's just no incentive. Those who put less down payment it's easy to walk away from. No fault. I mean, and you take that risk if you have the
gentleman
particular
yield?
property.
Will the gentleman
yes,
yield?
ma'am. Mm-hmm.
The problem is that LLPAs are double charging borrowers for risks they're already paying to cover, with the mortgage insurance. Don't forget the fees that you pay.
I get that.
Takes in consideration risk.
Give me an example.
Okay?
You walk me through an example of what you're talking about that's unfair. Show me two scenarios.
Well, there are a whole list of fees.
Let me see
they're
them.
going to. Do we have a list of fees?
No, I'm not talking about, I know the fees.
Yeah.
I'm talking about give me two borrowers.
But
give me,
no. But this you have to take into consideration. When you are, here's some factors that determine the LLPA fee amount. Now, everybody has to pay these fees, right? And they take into consideration a lot of things. The purpose of the loan, such as to buy a condo or an investment property.
I get that.
Loan features, such as a fixed rate mortgage, borrower characteristics, everything. amount of down payment, credit score, whether the borrower received housing counseling, first-time home buyer, all of this stuff is in the fees that are charged. And so when you don't have 20% down, you still are being judged in these fees because there's some risk that they have calculated and they have determined. So you're paying for the risk in the fees as they're calculated. And then on top of that, you have to have the mortgage insurance. And that means that you're paying more for your mortgage than the person who paid 20% down. It's equity. It's equalizing.
It's redistribution.
Now, look,
Maxine, is redistribution's all you're talking about.
just a moment. No, redistribution is a $180 billion bill that taxpayers are going to have to foot the cost of. Listen, even if you don't like the way it works, even if you don't think it should work that way, I don't believe that you shouldn't have to pay for it if that's what you're going to do. And it's not 180 billion that's determined. It's 300 plus billion that Mr. Davis. Do you believe that that's fair? I don't think you do.
Maxine,
You don't want to increase the debt.
okay, on the debt part of it and on who, let's get the examples you gave me. Oh, you didn't really give me two examples of what's fair and what's unfair to walk me through a scenario. I get the MGIC insurance. I get the difference. And I will tell you this, if you had a house, and I'm sure you own rental property, you would charge a different, if you were self-financing, you would charge a different fee, call it mortgage guarantee insurance or whatever, for those.
Okay, go ahead.
For those who have a less credit score than those who have a higher credit score, to protect your interest that you have worked hard to afford. And all I'm saying is this is nothing but redistribution of penalizing those with a good credit score and subsidizing those who, for whatever reason, have a less credit score. It's just like the example I gave you. Jim Brown taking his record away and giving it to somebody because, for whatever reason, they couldn't do what he did.
Look, you're a lover of Jim Brown's, and you'll use Jim Brown as an excuse for everything.
Because you got his book.
We talk about this all the time. But I'm sorry, I said 180 billion, and they reminded me that it's 1.8 billion. But it's still 1.8 billion.
It's kind of a lot of money.
With your amendments, how much is it?
I have no amendments. We have a manager's amendment, but the
Manager's
amendments that
amendment.
Democrats have proposed
Manager's amendment.
don't just deal with this, they deal with the whole idea of loan level price agreements. And I think your proposal is interesting to waive LLPAs for the amendment you've proposed to the bill for people who are first-time home buyers. Interesting. It would save them some money. It would come at expense of the safety and soundness of Fannie and Freddie, but it's not the same as hitting the budget deficit. It would be funded by Fannie and Freddie. It would increase risk. That's the amendment that you've proposed. There's no pay-for proposed in your amendment, but it would eliminate not just the new fees that are proposed by and implemented by Director Thompson. It would eliminate all LLPAs.
No.
This is your proposal.
Reclaiming my time.
No, that's not. Okay, reclaiming your time.
Maxine, I'd love to see, a breakdown. You tell me, use whatever number of price for the house. You give me two breakdowns, and you tell me what's so fair about both of them, and I'll be glad to have this debate offline. I don't want to take any more time, but this is none other than redistribution of wealth. And you're talking about a product. Housing, so goes the economy, so goes housing, because you've got over 200 different, you affect over 200 different areas that makes this a serious issue. And it's already hurting right now all across this country. I yield back.
Thank you. Gentlelady from New Mexico is recognized for whatever questions she may have.
Thank you so much, Chair. And, housing is really a major issue across this country. I have a very large rural district, and there's nowhere that I go that I don't run into people who want to be able to buy a home. And indeed, I worked for several decades with housing organizations to make sure that people could buy a home. Because we know, right, Ranking Member Waters, that buying a home is one of the best ways to get into the middle class, to pass on wealth to your children. And it's so essential, but right now we have some of the lowest home ownership rates in the country, and especially when we're talking about Latinos and people of color, right? And rural people. I mean, my folks are not able to buy a home. When do they need help? They need help when they are paying when they are paying for that mortgage, right? At closing. And at closing is where they have these fees.
That's right.
Right?
That's right.
And what you have just described to us is that if you have to pay double for the fact that you don't have 20% down, it's working against you.
That's right.
It sounds to me pretty simple. So I haven't figured out the math yet, but it would be something like this. If somebody had $100,000, let's use an easy money, they're going to spend $20,000 down. If you are working class, middle class, you might not have that $20,000 down. So you're going to pay for the private mortgage insurance.
That's right.
But you're also going to get docked for not having 20% down.
That's right.
It's a double charge.
That's right.
And so when we're talking about redistribution, what this rule was intended to do was stop redistributing to those who are more wealthy, right? That the redistribution that we're talking about is helping the middle class, standing with the middle class, helping the working families afford to buy a home. It sounds, is that it? Is that what captures it? Explain a little more to Ranking Member.
Well,
Is
I
that
think
it?
you did explain it, but let me talk to Mr. Well, let me explain it. Well, you explained it quite well, and what they are eliminating in their discussion is the fact that those fees that everybody has to pay takes into consideration risk and everything else, and some of the stuff that I alluded to. When you pay the fees that you're being charged on top of the mortgage insurance, you who were not able to pay the 20% down are paying more than the person who happened to be able to pay 20% down. And these are your wealthier people, but you're hurting middle-class people.
You're hurting middle-class people,
That's
and
right.
it's just an extra fee. It's a double
That's
fee
right.
you are paying
That's
for
right.
not having 20%.
That's right.
And that's it. And in doing this, you are also in the process making sure that the agency that these agencies have what they need to do their job, because they are essential
That's right.
to our housing market. That if we did not have these agencies, we would not see working families, young families. Like, what happens to nurses and teachers and people who are just starting their families? How hard is it to get a home for them?
Oh, it's almost impossible now. And like I said, even for those who would like to think of redistribution, what I want to do is what you just did so well, and that is you're talking about middle-class people in this country, some of whom maybe a few years ago could have paid 20% down, but now their income hasn't kept up with the inflation and other kinds of things. They can't pay 20%. These are, as a matter of fact, they have you think that rich people are subsidizing poor people. Poor people are not buying homes. It's middle-class people that's buying homes.
Right.
And the cost is, again, a combination of the fees and the mortgage insurance that they're paying. And this equalizes.
It equalizes it.
That's what it does.
So the title of the bill is the Middle Class Borrower Act. Does the bill favor middle-class families?
This bill hurts middle-class families.
Thank you, Chairman, and I yield back.
Thank you. Gentleman from Kentucky is recognized for any questions he may have.
Well, we've got a lot of acronyms today, and if you're not on financial services, you got to really pay attention. LLPA, FHFA, GSE, leaving out any of the ABCs here. This sounds like a good bill to me. I support the underlying bill. I want to talk about the CBO score, though, which Mr. Davidson brought up. There's two fundamental issues here, I think. And the first is this $1.8 billion score from the CBO. Is it really costing the taxpayers or the government $1.8 billion if what's happened here is an agency of the government, not Congress, but an agency of the government, changed their rules that effectively collected more tax on the people or from people, and then we undo it. Like, is that an accurate characterization of what's going on here, Mr. Davidson? Or how did they come up with 1.8 billion that this scores at?
Well, they have their model, and they claim that because we turn this off, and it'll take 2 years to go through the GAO study and implement something new, that we'll be foregoing $1.8 billion that they would collect. And to be clear, who collects the money? Fannie and Freddie collect the money. Now, the only way it hurts the Treasury is if FHFA plans to not let Fannie and Freddie, because as their conservator, much like Britney Spears' conservator, wouldn't let Britney Spears have her own money at times, they would keep it for themselves or put it in to other uses. FHFA gets to decide which money gets to be retained earnings for the entities that they really confiscated back in 08-09. They wiped out the equity of it. They took it over. The conservatorship for Fannie and Freddie's gone on longer than Britney Spears' conservatorship did. And so to that extent, they wouldn't be money going to the Treasury. It would be money going to the balance sheet of Fannie and Freddie. And so if we turn that off, the question is, should we replenish it? Well, on April 30th, there was no money flowing there. This doesn't turn off all the loan level price adjustments, LLPAs. It just turns off the new thing that got implemented on May 1st. So on April 30th, they weren't getting the money. So the CBO score is scored forward-looking, saying, well, over these next 2 years, if this bill passes, we would have been able to collect that money. So the question is, do we need to replenish what, frankly, if it was left to most of the people in the room, we wouldn't have never turned on?
So, by the way, that's more nuanced and far more accurate than the way I described it, and I appreciate that testimony because now I understand better the sort of rigmarole that's going on that I think most of Congress is not going to understand before this bill gets voted on, unfortunately. Not as deeply as you understand it. But this gets me to the point I want to make here, Mr. Chairman. We've got a 72-hour rule for, people have 72 hours to read legislation. And for the first time in the 11 years I've been in Congress, we've been following that rule. We're now in our 6th month, and we're following the 72-hour rule. It's been painful. It's made it hard to pass some of the bills because rightfully, not because we take that much time to read it, but the American people get time to read bills. And I think that's important, and they give us their feedback. But here's the wrench that's been thrown into this 72-hour rule. When did you find out about this CBO issue, Mr. Davidson?
Over the weekend, CBO really first notified Democrat committee staff, and then we found out as Republican committee staff. So over the weekend, we had to say, well, what are we going to find as a pay for? So we scrambled and found something that we could say, well, this is supposed to get turned off. We could just turn it off a year later, and it'll collect more than enough to pay for this
which gets me
phantom
to the point
revenue.
that this pay for, that's legislation that affects the budget that wasn't in the original bill. Is that correct?
Correct. The proposed manager's amendment didn't really go through committee. Just like the other amendments that are proposed, they weren't offered, even though most of the members proposed here. Actually, I think all of the members who are offering amendments to this bill were on committee. And so they're offering amendments here. They weren't part of the bill. They weren't part of the markup. The manager's amendment also wasn't part of the markup, but it's meant to address what happened subsequently, which is the CBO score.
So I know amendments are not subject to the 72-hour rule. It would be impossible to amend a bill. If they were, we'd be here, you'd amend it, and then you'd wait another 72 hours, and then you'd amend it and wait another 72 hours. So they're not subject to the 72-hour rule, but if you change a bill using an amendment, and we do that in the Rules Committee, as I would say, before it gets to the floor, but it's actually as a consequence of voting for the rule on the floor, if it's a self-executing amendment. It's a matter of degree, obviously, and for technical changes, I don't have an issue with fixing a bill after, and not giving people the full 72 hours to see the fix. But once you start getting into things like, how do we patch a $1.8 billion problem that CBO created over the weekend? And I would say created because I don't necessarily agree with the way they came up with this score. That's the thing that I'm wrestling with right now is it right for us to change this bill with less than 72 hours to see it in a way that makes it more amenable to the budget folks? Sorry, I'm wrestling with sort of an existential Rules Committee question. But let me ask you how you feel about the manager's amendment. Is it kind of a take it or leave it? Or
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a fielder's choice for the Rules Committee in terms of how you apply the rules. And I do think it's, a question for degree. I don't envy your job, nor would I really want to be on Rules Committee. But you do wrestle with these things. And you could see a manager's amendment that is like this, that's okay, we'll find a pay for it to address it. It's not a major change, but it is a change. It's substantive. And it poses a 10 basis point fee on everyone who gets a Fannie Freddie mortgage. I mean, that's a material difference. It certainly would cross the REINS Act threshold if we had that. But if you look at other managers' amendments, we've seen managers' amendments that have been pretty dramatic overhauls to the legislation because it was a deal cut, down in the basement as part of a negotiation somewhere, and this is what all the factions could agree to, and suddenly we're voting on it at 10 o'clock tomorrow morning, and so we've seen that in the past, so I get what you're wrestling with.
So I would just say I'm not really for or against the manager's amendment. I could take it or leave it, just like you've proposed, but I think there's a problem here that for all of us, not just the 9 Republicans, but the 4 Democrats, is how do we get CBO to get us the homework in time so that we can honor our commitment to the whole body to do, not just by the letter of the law, because whether we incorporate this manager's amendment or not, we are abiding by the letter of the 72-hour rule, because amendments aren't subject to the 72-hour rule. But the spirit of it could get violated in more extreme cases. Not in this case. I agree with you. This is not one of those cases where a bunch of people cooked up something that changes the entire nature of the bill. The manager's amendment is a technical fix to a technical problem. I think, we can all agree or disagree. We can have differences of opinion on whether the CBO is always right about things. But I'll just close by saying I think long-term we need to address this issue. Surprises are for little kids at birthday parties. They aren't for Congress and the CBO to give us a surprise here in the middle of our 72-hour window that we then, to honor our commitment to the entire body on budget rules and on everything else, we have to deal with. So I don't envy your job, Mr. Chairman. I might have. And with that, I will yield back, and I'll trust the chairman to solve this problem today and long term.
Thank you very much. The gentleman from Colorado is recognized for any questions he may have. Thank the gentleman. Are there any other questions for this panel? Seeing none, I thank the witnesses for their testimony and their patience, and you're both excused. Is there anyone else seeking to testify on H 3799, HRes 461, or HR 3564? Seeing none, this closes the hearing. Without objection, the committee stands in recess, subject to the call of the chair. I will advise you, we hope to have the rule done before the end of the first vote, so I wouldn't go very far. I would also tell you there is pretty decent Italian food, and you are welcome to come join us if you care to. Gentleman from Texas, Dr. Burgess.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move the committee grant H.R. 3564, the Middle Class Borrower Protection Act of 2023, a structured rule. The rule waives all points of order against consideration of the bill. The rule provides for 1 hour of general debate, equally divided and controlled by the chair and the ranking minority member of the Committee on Financial Services or their respective designees. The rule provides that an amendment in the nature of a substitute consisting of the text of the Rules Committee print 118-8 as modified by the amendment printed in Part A of the Rules Committee report shall be considered as adopted and the bill as amended shall be considered as read. The rule waives all points of order against provisions of the bill as amended. The rule further makes in order only those amendments printed in Part B of the Rules Committee report. Each amendment made in order may be offered only in the order printed in the report, may be offered only by a member designated in the report, shall be considered as read, shall be debatable for the time specified in the report, equally divided and controlled by a proponent and an opponent of the amendment, shall not be subject to amendment, shall not be subject to a demand for division of the question in the House or in the Committee of the Whole. All points of order against amendments printed in Part B of the report are waived. The rule provides one motion to recommit. The rule further provides for the consideration of H.R. 3799, the Choice Arrangement Act under a structured rule. The rule waives all points of order against consideration of the bill. The rule provides 80 minutes of general debate equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Education and Workforce or their respective designees, and Ways and Means or their respective designees. The rule provides that an amendment in the nature of a substitute consisting of the text of Rules Committee print 118-9 as modified by the amendment and printed in Part C of the Rules Committee report shall be considered as adopted, and the bill as amended shall be considered as read. The rule waives all points of order against provisions in the bill as amended. The rule further makes in order only those amendments printed in Part D of the Rules Committee report. Each amendment made in order may be offered only in the order printed in the report and may be offered only by a member designated in the report, shall be considered as read, shall be debatable for the time specified in the report, equally divided and controlled by a proponent and an opponent, shall not be subject to amendment, shall not be subject to a demand for the division of the question in the House or in the Committee of the Whole. All points of order against the amendments printed in Part D of the report are waived. The rule provides one motion to recommit. The rule further provides for consideration of H.Res. 461, condemning the use of elementary and secondary school facilities to provide shelter for aliens who are not admitted to the United States under a closed rule. The rule provides that upon adoption of this resolution, it shall be in order without intervention of any point of order to consider H.Res. 461. The rule provides that the amendments to the resolution and the preamble recommended by the Committee on Education and Workforce, now printed in the bill, shall be considered as adopted, and the resolution as amended shall be considered as read. Finally, the rule provides 1 hour of general debate, equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking member of the Committee on Education and the Workforce or their respective designees.
Thank you very much. You've now heard the motions. Is there any discussion or amendment to the rule?
If you don't mind, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman's recognized.
And thank you to the ranking member for yielding. I appreciate it. Just on a happy note, my rules associate, Ashley Beerworth, this is her last rules meeting. She got a promotion. She's going to be Congresswoman Merritt Miller Meeks's LD, and so she was a leader on my staff since 2019 when she came on board. Been a great rules associate, and I just want to wish her the best. Thank you, and I yield back.
Just quickly, could we send you and keep her? Okay, I think it had bipartisan support, too. With that, we'll resume things. So, again, heard the motions, or any discussion or amendment?
Congratulations on your new job. Will you take us with you? But anyway, I ask unanimous consent to insert into the record statements from Representatives Lloyd Doggett, Stephen Cohen, and Joe Courtney.
Without objection.
And, Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment to the rule. I move the committee make an order amendment number 12 to H.R. 3799 offered by myself, which prevents offer of individual coverage health reimbursement arrangements from excluding an employee from the marketplace subsidies. Let me just briefly explain what it is. The amendment would ensure that workers have access to affordable health care that fits their needs. This amendment would prevent the offer of an individual coverage health reimbursement arrangement, ICRA, from excluding a person from claiming a premium tax credit, a refundable credit that helps families cover health insurance premiums for plans purchased through the marketplace. If a person would like to enter the marketplace, they should be able to do so. This amendment would help protect employees who might otherwise be forced to accept ICRAs that may not be the best option for them or their families. It's about choice, plain and simple. So if you care about people having access to affordable health care that works for their families, you should support this amendment.
Is there any further discussion on the amendment? Hearing none, the questions on the amendment, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say no. No. The opinion of the chair, the noes have it.
Well, that sounded close. I'm going to ask for a roll call.
Roll call has been requested. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Burgess.
Burgess votes no.
Mr. Burgess, no. Mr. Rushenthaler.
No.
Mr. Rushenthaler, no. Mrs. Fishbach.
No.
Mrs. Fishbach, no. Mr. Massey.
No.
Mr. Massey, no. Mr. Norman.
No.
Mr. Norman, no. Mr. Roy.
No.
Mr. Roy, no. Mrs. Houchin.
No.
Mrs. Houchin, no. Mr. Langworthy.
No.
Mr. Langworthy, no. Mr. McGovern.
Aye.
Mr. McGovern, aye. Ms. Scanlon.
Aye.
Ms. Scanlon, aye. Mr. Neguse.
Aye.
Mr. Neguse, aye. Ms. Ledger Fernandez.
Aye.
Ms. Ledger Fernandez, aye. Mr. Chairman.
No.
Mr. Chairman, no.
Clerk will report the total.
4 yeas, 9 nays.
Shows how deceptive the acoustics in the room are. Amendment is not agreed to. Is there any further amendment?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment.
Gentlelady
to
from
the rule.
Pennsylvania is recognized.
Thank you. I move the committee make an order amendment number 4 to H.R. 3799 offered by Representative Doggett, which clarifies coverage purchased with individual coverage health reimbursement arrangements must meet the coverage requirements, including for pre-existing conditions of the Public Health Service Act. The amendment would also prohibit employers from discriminating against any class of employees in offers of such arrangements.
Is there any further discussion of the amendment? Hearing none, the questions on the amendment, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say no. No. Opinion of the chair, the noes have it.
I'd seek a roll call.
Roll call's been requested. Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Burgess.
Burgess votes no.
Mr. Burgess, no. Mr. Rushenthaler.
No.
Mr. Rushenthaler, no. Mrs. Fishbach.
No.
Mrs.
Fishbach,
no. Mr. Massey.
No.
Mr. Massey, no. Mr. Norman.
No.
Mr. Norman, no. Mr. Roy.
No.
Mr. Roy, no. Mrs. Houchin.
No.
Mrs. Houchin, no. Mr. Langworthy.
No.
Mr. Langworthy, no. Mr. McGovern.
Aye.
Mr. McGovern, aye. Ms. Scanlon.
Aye.
Ms. Scanlon, aye. Mr. Neguse.
Aye.
Mr. Neguse, aye. Ms. Ledger Fernandez.
Aye.
Ms. Ledger Fernandez, aye. Mr. Chairman.
No.
Mr. Chairman, no.
Clerk will report the total.
4 yeas, 9 nays.
Amendment's not agreed to. Are there any further amendments?
Mr. Chairman.
Gentlelady from New Mexico is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment to the rule. I move the committee make an order, amendment number 5 to H.R. 3799, offered by Representative Jayapal, which requires that association health plans cover maternity and newborn care. Earlier this evening, we heard that the AHPs could choose to provide that health care. We should make sure that all women who are pregnant and their newborns are offered health insurance coverage. This is simple. I would think that it was not controversial, and so I move this amendment, Mr. Chair.
Is there any further discussion on the amendment? Hearing none, the questions on the amendment, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. No. The opinion of the chair, the noes have it. Roll call's been requested. Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Burgess.
Burgess votes no.
Mr. Burgess, no. Mr. Rushenthaler. Mr. Rushenthaler, no. Mrs. Fishbach. Mrs. Fishbach, no. Mr. Massey. Mr. Massey, no. Mr. Norman. Mr. Norman, no. Mr. Roy. Mr. Roy, no. Mrs. Houchin. Mrs. Houchin, no. Mr. Langworthy. Mr. Langworthy, no. Mr. McGovern. Mr. McGovern, aye. Ms. Scanlon. Ms. Scanlon, aye. Mr. Neguse. Mr. Neguse, aye. Ms. Ledger-Fernandez. Ms. Ledger-Fernandez, aye. Mr. Chairman.
No.
Mr. Chairman, no.
Clerk will report the total.
4 yeas, 9 nays.
Amendment's not agreed to. Are there any further amendments? Hearing no request for further amendments, the question's on the motion to report. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. No. Opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. A roll call's been requested. Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Burgess.
Burgess votes aye.
Mr. Burgess, aye. Mr. Rushenthaler. Mr. Rushenthaler, aye. Mrs. Fishbach. Mrs. Fishbach, aye. Mr. Massey. Mr. Massey, aye. Mr. Norman. Mr. Norman, aye. Mr. Roy. Mr. Roy, aye. Mrs. Houchin. Mrs. Houchin, aye. Mr. Langworthy. Mr. Langworthy, aye. Mr. McGovern. Mr. McGovern, no. Ms. Scanlon. Ms. Scanlon, no. Mr. Neguse. Mr. Neguse, no. Ms. Ledger-Fernandez. Ms. Ledger-Fernandez, no. Mr. Chairman.
Aye.
Mr. Chairman, aye.
Clerk will report the total.
9 yeas, 4 nays.
The ayes have it. The motion to report is agreed to. Accordingly, Dr. Burgess will be managing the rule for the majority,
And I'll do it for the minority.
and my friend will do it for the minority. Without objection, the committee is adjourned.